no cargo but grains from Andalos, bound for your city. I am not here to steal your cargo or to sell you into slavery, so if that was the cause for your worry you have no need to be concerned," Ina answered, stepping down the ramp as his men stayed at the ready. "I merely have a few questions that I would like to ask, after which you will be free to continue on your way, mayhaps even with a little more silver for your troubles." Then the captain stepped onto their deck, and his sister wrapped her arms around herself and leaned against the railing, sick. He took her hand again, squeezing, but he never once took his eyes away from the Volantene captain or from his men, who stood watching with their bows and their ship's mighty scorpions at the ready. These were no sellswords, they were not even men at arms or knights, no, they were professional troops, drilled and barracked in the ways of Valyria of old, and these were ones who were trained entirely for fighting at sea and armed for the same. His knights, as valiant and as true they might be, would be little challenge for them should they want to storm their ship for whatever reason, though he prayed to all the gods he knew that such would not be needed. "My first question is a simple one and one that should be easy for you to answer," the Volantene said with a kinder, softer voice, at ease beneath the watching eyes of his seamen. "How many days away from Lies are you and ourselves?" "A week and a half, mayhaps just a week with good winds," came the captain's careful answer. "But we sailed from Pentos, not from Lies." "And how many Lycian ships have you spotted?" "Were they galleys? Merchantmen? Corsairs? Barges?" "We have seen a few fishing boats and hulks on the waters, and naught but a single war galley watching the stepstones." Then the captain began to smile, and not in the way that a man who had heard good news might, but in the way of a predator learning of wounded prey. It unnerved him to see. "And did you stop in Lies, perchance? How were the markets?" "To take on fresh supplies for the last part of our journey," Imelo answered after a moment's thinking. "The markets were busy, as they usually are this time of year. A ship with holds full of Tiroshi steel had come into port not long before we had, so prices for good iron were low. I was half tempted to sell my grains there and pick up metalworks instead, but I chose not in the end." "Thank you, you have been of great help," Tineris said cheerfully, reaching for his coin purse and plucking out a handful of gold coins before handing them over to the captain, who looked at them with surprise before turning towards the ramp and starting his way over. Then he paused and turned, his eyes meeting Viserys' own as the exile king's heart thundered in his chest and ears, and then Ina looked to Melo as if he had saw nothing. "I had almost forgotten the last question," Tineris said with amusement before growing serious once more. "Did you see any men belonging to the company of the Wolf whilst there?" "I did," Melo muttered grumpily. "But I make sure to try and avoid those types, though I had little luck. They were by the harbour master and the provisioners, even in the good inns where captains make deals with each other." And with that, Ina smiled again, more widely, and he turned and shouted something to his men in High Valyrian, making them laugh before turning back to the captain and leaving Viserys confused as to his meaning, his mind going back to those years so long before their exile or even before the usurpers' revolt, when his father had taken over teaching him of their family's Valyrian heritage from the Grand Maester, teaching him everything that he knew of the language, things that had been more useful in their exile than his father might have ever imagined. "You have helped us more than you might think," Ina smiled. "One of my men shall give you a banner to fly from your bow. You will have no more trouble from any Volantene whilst it is there, nor any tolls either. Consider it a reward for services rendered." Melo looked towards the Volantene captain in a stunned silence then, and just as quickly as Ina had said it one of his men stepped down the ramp holding a banner 3 feet in height and just as many across, a grand sigil that would not shame any army to have carried into battle, a golden dragon upon a field of deep purple, wings unfurled and reaching out towards the tops of a great V that merged together beneath the dragon's tail and dominated the sigil, under which were 3 high Valyrian Glyphs, an old alphabet that was never once used in Westeros but on the Isles of Dragonstone and Driftmark where the Targaryens had made their home years before the conquest, but he could read them still, if barely. FVP, the freehold of Volantis and its peoples. Brandon took it from the Volantene sea soldier before handing it over to one of the ship's sailors, all whilst the captain grinned as widely as he could at the sight of it as Ina returned to his own vessel, his men removing the grapnels and raising the ramp to leave and letting their ship continue on its way with nothing more, just as they had been promised, and instantly whatever tension there might have been in the air over being stopped by a purpose-built warship faded, and as they continued on their way, their ship slowly coming up to speed once more. "That went better than I had expected," Tijet said with a smile, taking his hand from the grip of his sword. "I thought we were going to die." "You weren't the only one," Brandon agreed with a nod and a sigh of relief. "Those bows wouldn't have cared if we were wearing plate or not at that range." Viserys smiled, and turned back towards his wife, striding across the deck as he finally lowered his guard. "See, sweet sister. There was never anything to be worried about." Then he lowered his voice to a whisper, as he had before, just in case someone might otherwise overhear him. "We are safe from the usurper here," he said, his voice lowered to a whisper in case someone might overhear them and put an end to either of them when they were so close to being safe. "We won't have to worry about his men in Volantis, not within the Black Walls." Daenerys smiled again, then, touching his hand as he reached out and brushed a stray hair from her cheek. Even at times like this when she was at her worst, she looked stunning, as if the maiden herself had stepped down from a pedestal and come to life, and he loved her, utterly, as his sister and as his wife, just as their father had loved their mother and been loved by her in turn. She deserved everything he could give her, everything, and she deserved to have a kingdom, just as he had promised all those years before to their mother on her deathbed. Mayhaps she even deserved to have it more than Viserys did. Seven knew he might never be able to forgive himself for how harsh he might have been on her when she was young, ever concerned that every noise she might make could bring the usurper's knives one step closer, and ever stressed by the difficulty in finding food and drink for the both of them. And though he might have done things to her that he regretted, awful things that no brother and no king should ever do to their lady wife, he realized now, for a true dragon was as patient as he was graceful and gentle, like Jaehaerys the wise and Viserys' own father, not prone to rash fits of anger and rage like Maegor the cruel or Aegon the unworthy. No, he would never hurt her, not again, ever, not even if their exile should last 1,000 years, for such a thing was neither manly nor kingly, and Viserys was a man and a king both, and like father and brother both. He would never raise his hand against his bride, and he had sworn as much to her on their wedding night before their bedding. He smiled again as he met her violet eyes, leaning in to kiss. And she gagged, and turned back towards the side of the ship. He sighed, gently patting her back, hoping they made it to Volantis soon so as to spare her from any further discomfort. This was not her first time on a ship, certainly not, and he had thought that she had outgrown such sickness by her 10th name-a-day. But it seemed otherwise, since it had come back with a furor that he had scarcely imagined, since it seemed that she was ill almost every morning, even if her stomach seemed to settle as the day went on. Once he had his throne, he would sooner find a way to bring the castles to her rather than subject his sweet little sister to such. Then, as before, there was a cry from the bow. "Gods above! There's a whole fleet!" Viserys froze for a moment, almost not understanding what it was that had been shouted. Then he spun on his heels, marching up the steps to the forecastle to see with his own eyes, to be sure what the crewman had said was true, as Tijet moved to take his position alongside Daenerys, always one of the three on guard next to her to keep her safe from harm, just as there was always another next to Viserys, Brandon this time, and Maelor was there as well, alongside. Not even an aging man with failing sight would have needed a fair eye to see what was ahead, for across the eastern seas, Volantis still perhaps an hour away, he saw a fleet greater than any he had ever dreamed to imagine, 1,000 ships that stretched beyond the horizon, violet sails half-reefed and oars rowing at a synchronized pace between all the ships, matching the deep banging of drums that kept the entire fleet in an immense crescent, the entire battle formation moving at once in an incredible display of discipline. Smaller skirmish ships stayed upon the flanks of the Great Armada, carrying no more than 50 oars apiece, but they were built for speed and carried heavy rams at the front, gleaming golden in the sun, and the ships grew bigger and bulkier from the fringe to the core, where there were massive floating fortresses, veritable sea-going castles of wood and sailcloth bristling from one side to the other with scorpions and spitfires and catapults. Some even carried trade buckets. The merchant ship, a dwarf facing giants, rocked from the immense ripples that came from such synchronized movements, and the air filled with the deafening bang 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 of drums being struck on every ship. 2 heartbeats passing between every strike that he could feel in the wooden boards beneath their feet ever more strongly as they grew ever closer to the. Maelor rushed to the aft castle of his ship, grabbing the tiller, the small piece of wood that connected down the rear of the hull to the rudder submerged in the waters below, and steered, carefully taking the humble cog through the middle by slipping it through the gap between one ship and another, and there, as the first ships passed them by, they saw the flagship at the very heart of the battle fleet, and the word colossal could barely describe it, for the immense warship was surely the Harrenhal of Gallies, for Viserys had never seen one like it, not in the royal fleet that had hurried them to Essos, not in the ports of Braavos that had been ever visible outside the window of their manse, and not in any other city that he had seen in their exile. It was a marvel of Volanten shipbuilding, a titan of 6 decks, 3 for oars as long in length as trees were in height and 3 for fighting, revealing through opened weapon ports more scorpions than could be found within any army, larger and more powerful than their land-based cousins for fighting at sea. Some of them were even using chains instead of ropes and bolts that ended with grappling hooks instead of serrated points, made to shoot a grapnel far beyond the range of any sailor's throwing arm and to show that not even the fastest moving warship was safe from being boarded. But of all the things that struck him the most, it was the word written on the immense warship's aft in great golden letters, tall and proud beneath what was surely the Admiral's palace. Vigor. The same name as the ancient Valyrian god of war, on land, at sea and in the skies. Viserys knew the name fit, and he was ever grateful for the banner flying from the merchantman's prow that spared them from whatever wrath such a mighty ship might be able to unleash in the throes of battle, and even more so to be free of the mobile islands that comprised a fleet that was meant for only one thing that made what the Valyrian captain said before make perfect sense in an instant. He set such thoughts aside as they emerged from the other side, swiftly continuing on their way as the winds began to turn to their side once more, the ship doubling in speed in just a few minutes, and though he knew it would be an hour or even longer before they reached their destination, he knew it would be that day, he knew it would be soon, and so he waited at the railings, watching in silence till his sister climbed up the steps herself and stood beside him with Tijet not far behind. Waiting for the place he hoped would be a safe home as much as an ally to come into view. "What do you think they want to do?" his sister asked quietly, feeling better now that the water was not shaking with the synchronized strikes of so many oars at once. "I mean, what could need so many ships?" "I was wondering that myself," Viserys said quietly, not taking his gaze from the gently rippling waters ahead. "I couldn't understand what Captain Ina had meant when he said in High Valyrian. It didn't make sense till I saw the fleet." "What did he say?" his sister asked, curious but fearful. "The gate is open." "You don't mean they are going to invade Lyse?" Brandon asked with surprise. "The Lysen have a fleet just as big, but they've got defenses to stop themselves from being attacked by sea. Defenses that are no doubt currently being guarded by the company of the Wolf Tijet Lannister side. I have a feeling the Lysen are about to find out that sellswords aren't worth nearly as much as they might hope. The sellswords will likely massacre the captains in their inns and do everything they can to keep the Lysen ships in port," Viserys said, looking to the horizon. "That will allow the Volantens to claim them when the city falls. And with so many ships, neither Myr nor Tioche will be able to interfere," Brandon murmured in understanding. "But they can't have enough troops on those ships to hold Lyse. Half the damned island is a city, they'd get picked to death in the streets." "That's because they are not going to try and hold it," Bran Tijet said, laughing. "They are going to sack the city. The ships aren't the defense, the ships are the prize. They are going to kick the door down and carry it off with them when they leave. I bet those ships aren't even carrying that many troops, since they'll need room for the—" "But wouldn't Myr try to stop them if it means they become too strong?" his sweet sister asked. "What reason would they have to, my queen?" Tijet answered, adding her proper title at last now that they were out of earshot of the rest of the crew. "Lyse losing its fleet works to Myr's interests just as much as it does for Volantis. Without a fleet, their magisters will be forced to rely on the Myrish for protection. No doubt this is a move the Volantens are making for a reason, whatever it is." "Aye, and good luck figuring that out," Brandon smirked. "The Volantens made that game with the little pieces that the Highborn are so fond of. Sivas is its name, I think. They play it a dozen moves ahead of what's on the board. They like strategy, but not that much." Bran Tijet smiled before turning towards his king. "But still, they wouldn't do something like that for nothing. Might be we'll be able to find out once we reach Volantis, and that won't be long. Look." And with that, Tijet raised his hand and pointed to a coast not far away, a false island made by the gap between two of the River Rowan's mouths covered in thousands of deep green trees specked with barely visible dots of orange that grew larger little by little as the merchantman came ever closer, all arranged in neat lines that stretched across the land and tended to by scores of workers. "That's the Orange Shore," Tijet said. "There's not a foot of ground on the island that the Volantens don't use for growing fruit on. The Dothraki don't come this far south anymore, not since Volantis gave them a beating 10 years ago rather than pay tribute, but they wouldn't be able to reach it anyway. The water is too deep and fast for their horses and the Dothraki don't believe in boats. If they don't believe in boats, then how in the seven hells did they get past the Rhone in the first place? Brandon asked, confused. They went around. Tidjet shrugged. Besides, it's not like there aren't a few fords for them to cross further up. Not here, though. From here, the only crossing left is the one a few minutes ahead, on the fourth mouth of the Rhone. That's where Volantis is, and we'll be seeing it any minute now. When did you last go to Volantis, sir? Viserys asked, curious, as they began passing the orange shore by. 4 years ago, the Lannister answered. Volantis needed mercenaries for the war against Qohor, and they were willing to pay well, and after the war we ended up staying there for a little bit longer, since the Volantens sometimes have political matters to settle. For street fighting. More like indecisiveness, your Grace. Tidjet sighed. The Volantens have factions that rule their freehold, and the elephants had been so uncertain of war that the tigers had to force it to happen by staging an incident that would force the Qohorics to start one for them. Volantis crushed the Qohorics without too much of a challenge, but even the tigers thought they'd put up more of a fight than they did, which is probably why Volantis didn't go for Norphos afterwards. It makes sense if they thought that they were not strong, but that Qohor was simply weak, Viserys said in understanding. Are they strong? Tidjet asked before saying more quietly, more seriously, lacking any of his Lannister playfulness. You'll see for yourself soon enough, your Grace, for if there is anyone in Essos, anyone, who can win you back your throne, it is the Volantens. And with that, Viserys smiled before looking back towards the waters, and at that moment the city revealed itself from beneath the horizon like a beautiful woman rising from beneath her blankets, and the sight was just as pleasant, for as far as the eye could see he saw the first and greatest of the free cities, the only one that could claim to truly be the freehold heir and the only one that carried on Valyria's legacy in faith, language and culture. Volantis. Even from where he was, so far away from the city, he could see the monolithic and dark shape of the black walls of Volantis, and he knew from his Maestus lessons and from talk in all the places that he and his sister had visited in their exile that there were no greater fortifications in the world, for the black walls were made in the old Valyrian way, with the same techniques that had created Dragonstone and done so without ever once leaving the telltale marks of a mason's tools, the entire fortress being one single piece of stonework, and the same was true of the black walls of Volantis. The massive battlements that were 200 feet in height and closer to cliffs than walls and whose surface could not be marred by anything in the known world, not with steel and not with diamond. Not even Valyrian steel could scratch the surface, metal and stone alike made in a manner that had died with the doom, and behind the invincible fortifications he could see the tops of towers made in the same manner, temples and palaces and 100 other things that were the oldest buildings in the city, the heart around which the rest had grown, and though the buildings outside the black walls were nowhere near as grand as those within, they were a dozen times better than the squalid and stinking hovels that made up much of King's Landing, made of good stone and with roofs made of orange tiles baked from clay taken from the banks of the Rhone and with what could only be a grand temple to the Lord of Light, made with an assortment of bricks that made the building change color from bottom to top just as a flame might, with an opening in its dome-shaped ceiling so as to allow the light of the sun through in day and to let the smoke of their night fires out in the evening. On the west side of the Rhone the youngest and poorest parts of the city could be found, a maze of inns and houses and workshops and brothels and warehouses and docks and bakeries and everything else that a city needed to live and work and laugh, surrounded by several rings of walls and turrets and lesser fortresses and guard barracks, strong and modern defenses that were clearly in good condition, but were not even the shadow of the black walls that had been erected in the earliest days of the city's history, when it was nothing more than a fortress with which to watch the best passages into the land of the long summer and to keep the Rhone from sailing down their river without risk. And there in the midst of the city was the river itself, splitting the great city in twain, but just as how old Valyria had never been one to shy away from a challenge, whether it be a military one or an engineering one, the Volantens had done the same and built a massive bridge of black stone meant to imitate the unbreakable material of the black walls, called the Long Bridge. It was immense, crossing a river 5 times the width of the Blackwater Rush, and doing so with the strength to hold a town's worth of structures on its back, all shops and stores and other places of commerce, ranging from the humblest shoemaker to goldsmiths so skilled as to be fit for the custom of any king or queen. From the great arch that was the bridge's shape, however, came the appearance of hanging corpses, dangling freely from the bridge's edges as a warning to other murderers and rapists and pirates, and beneath them passed an unending torrent of ships both for commerce and for battle, watched over by twin winch towers on either side of the bridge, the driving place for a chain lying unseen beneath the waters below, and as if to add emphasis, there were 2 more great galleys besides, scorpions, forever trained upon the vessels that passed to and from their city. Just seeing it all made Viserys know that what Tijet had said was right. If there was ever a place in the entire world that could help him to win back his throne, this was it. He only hoped that they would be willing, for if they would not help him and his sister, then he had little idea of what else to do, but to perhaps try and sell the dragon eggs so as to be able to hire the Golden Company and an army of sellswords with which to try and take back his kingdoms, with the hope that the loyal lords of his kingdom would rise for him. But what reason would they have to turn him down? He was the rightful king of Westeros, the one for whom many lords would rise to see him returned to the Iron Throne, and further still he could promise the old bloodlands in Westeros to replace the traitors who had turned against him, giving them real power again, power that they had not had since the Century of Blood. And so he turned to his sister, and smiled, hopeful. "See, sweet sister. Volantis is as mighty as I always told you. They will help us take back our throne. You'll see Westeros soon." And the dragon skulls his sister added as the merchant cog passed beneath the bridge, coming to a halt on the edge of the long quay. He laughed, and then there was a shout from the shore. "Greetings," came the voice of a well-dressed man, silver hair interspersed with brown and with eyes that carried only a hint of Valyrian heritage, behind which were a pair of the strangest animals that Viserys had ever seen, large pale white things bigger than bulls with great ears, a pair of stubby little tusks and a long, trumpeting nose, fastened to large ornate carriages. "I am Ilario, and I see travelers from distant lands. Do any of you need a guide, perhaps? I have dwarf elephants and fine Hatharis for you to travel in." "Oh good," Tijet sighed. "The vultures are here. Men like him make their fortune off travelers from Westeros who don't know any better. Is there any alternative?" Viserys asked. "We have belongings that need to be brought, and you cannot carry them and guard at the same time." "The king's right," Brandon said to Tijet with a shrug. "You've been here before. Show them some of your famous Lannister charm and lead the way." "Fine," Tijet said with another and longer sigh. "But if this goes wrong, I did not suggest this plan. And I shall not hold you to it." Sir Viserys smiled, stepping aside so that Tijet may descend the steps. "We have need of transportation," Tijet said, marching down the gangplank and onto the quay. "4 passengers, with baggage." "And where do you wish to go?" "A tour of the city, perhaps," Ilario offered, trying to tempt the Lannister knight. "A visit to the Temple of the Lord of Light, maybe. Or a visit to the Dreaming Dragon, the pleasure house founded by a daughter of Jaehaerys the Wise himself. Her descendants still ply the trade if you wish to." "We can give you the destination once we get started," Tijet said, cutting the travel master off. "But first, we need to know the price." "A small issue," Ilario said then, smiling. "Westeros gold has little value here, but I can easily arrange to have it exchanged for Volan 10 honors. 1 dragon for 10 honors is fitting." And there it is, Brandon sighed. "As a Lannister, I know quite a bit about gold," Tijet said, crossing his arms. "And I also know that 3 silver stags makes an honor since you make no other kind of coin. This isn't my first visit to Volantis, you see. And my companions and I have a meeting with the Old Blood that we are direly late for." The Old Blood?" Ilario said quietly and with obvious disconcert. "They do not take kindly to being interrupted by anyone, not least a half-born like you," Tijet said. "Now, shall I tell them that we are late because our Hathari driver asked too many questions, or should I say that he hurried us there as quickly as he could?" Of course," Ilario said, changing the tone of his voice to one that was perhaps not quite as enthusiastic as it had been before. 4 passengers and luggage. Free of charge, as any friend of the Old Blood deserves." "Thank you," Tijet said, waving over Viserys and the others. "Our things are on the first deck in the guest cabin." Ilario nodded deeply and bowed twice, and then gave commands to a waiting group of men, either slaves or freeborn, Viserys could not tell which, who then quickly came aboard and began offloading the trunks that they had been given by the Pentoshi Magister, never once taking an opportunity to open them and never once fumbling with any, carrying them out to the back of their Hathari and placing them within a metal cage, sealed with a lock that only the Hatharis driver could open, and only when they had reached their destination, to protect the belongings within from theft. Viserys smiled at it all, watching carefully as it took two grown men to put the chest that contained the dragon eggs into the rear of the Hathari, but the dwarf elephant, a pale creature the color of fresh fallen snow, was utterly unfazed by the added weight of so much luggage. Proceeding down the steps and down the ramp himself, stepping onto Volantene territory for the first time, Viserys smiled as the warm winds blew through his silver hair and past his cheeks, feeling truly comfortable for the first time since he had left Dragonstone all those years before, and he escorted his lady wife down the ramp as well, taking her hand to make sure she would not slip or fall due to whatever disorientation she might have left from their voyage before helping her into the Hatharis' lavish interior, a place of comfortable padded seats beneath sheets of dark violet velvet and wood slat windows that could be opened or closed at will by those within, whilst a small round hole in the ceiling provided clear light for the little table that sat in the center of the Hathari, atop of which was a large round bowl of apples and oranges and peaches and plums and even a bundle of grapes, all given to the passenger freely. He followed her in, sitting alongside his beloved sister, and then came Brandon on the other side of the table and then Tijet besides him, and then and only then did the coachman, one of Ilario's men, close the door and climb onto the front of the Hathari, saying a soft word to the dwarf elephant that honked with a blow of its trumpet nose in answer before setting off at a speed not much swifter than walking, starting them on their journey through the city's busy streets, past other Hatharis and their own white elephants and their own honking, the noise coming through the window slats along with all the talking and clattering and laughing and haggling of city life. "What about Bronn?" his sister said, looking around the Hathari only to see no room for the sellsword. "He's still on the ship. We can make do without him." Viserys smiled, comforting his concerned sister. "I would think him a spy, too." "You as well," Tijet said, slumping back into the seat, taking a grape between armored fingers and plucking it from the bunch. "I thought for a moment whether it would be better to toss him in the Rhone rather than leave him. He's a spy, for certain, for there's not a sellsword in the world who would find an exile king and swear to serve him, no matter who they might be. Whose man he is, though, I'm less sure. Not my brother's, for sure, else he would have stabbed me in the back the moment I first turned around. The usurper has always had spies following us." Viserys sighed. "He must have surely been one of his." "I am less sure about that than you," my King Tijet said, throwing the grape into his mouth as he did. "If he was, he would have tried to kill you both already." "He hadn't. He wouldn't have been able to do it, either." Brandon smiled, looking out the wooden window to see his eagle following their path in the skies above. "Tijet here is one of the best swords House Lannister ever had." "I think you would find that to be Brightraw," Tijet answered with a Lannister's wit, making the Northman laugh. "In any case, he won't be able to find us here once we're past the Black Walls." "No one could." "Then we will finally have a chance to rest," Viserys said, smiling. "Exactly so, but only if the Old Blood allow you within the Black Walls," Tijet answered at last. "The Volantens make use of slave guards to help police the slaves themselves, but the Black Walls aren't guarded by slaves but by freeborn soldiers, well trained, well equipped and fanatically loyal, the lot of them. They won't let you through unless they think you should be inside and have true business with the Old Blood." "They won't bar my entry, surely?" Viserys asked, surprised. "I am the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms, and the Old Blood are kin to Targaryens by both coming from Old Valyria." You are, but the Volantens have their own plans, whatever they might be," Brandon reasoned. "That fleet of theirs is proof enough of that." "Then what should I say, for them to let me in?" Viserys asked, looking to his knights. "Be honest about why you are here," Tijet said. "Not too honest." "But honest." "Flattery might work," Brandon shrugged. "It usually does in Essos." Viserys looked to his wife, then, saying nothing and yet saying everything in the silence. "Maybe you could make yourself of use to them, so that they have a reason to let you in." Daenerys suggested quietly. "They're less likely to ignore us if they think they have some use for us. So, I should flatter them, offer my services to them and yet not be too honest about why I am here." Viserys sighed. The court of the Red Keep was less convoluted than that, and everyone was plotting about something there. Your sister is right, Tijet agreed. If the Volantens think you could help them with whatever it is they have planned, then mayhaps you could get an invitation behind the black walls. If that fails. Tijet went quiet, then, and Viserys looked to his knight. I do have a friend within who might be able to let us in. I was here for quite a while, and had more than a few chances to meet with the old blood myself. Most were curious as to why a Lannister of Casterly Rock was here in Essos, Tijet explained with a sigh. More were wondering if I was looking for my brother Geryon, wherever it is he's gone. Either way, I know someone who might be able to let us in, but they should be our last resort. Then I will hope we do not have to speak with them, Viserys said, feeling a clunk beneath his feet as he looked out the window to his right and saw the stores of the bridge as they passed by. There were merchants selling everything that one could find beneath the sun and the moon, everything from spices to slaves to weapons to clothing to wine to ancient heirlooms of the Freehold and the Giscari and the Rhoynar and every other civilization that had stood where the Freehold once had, and even a book merchant, all surrounded by throngs of freeborn men and women of all classes, but more and more of the rich and the powerful could be seen as they grew closer and closer to the. It won't be long before we are there. Your Grace, there is one thing you need to remember whilst you are here, Tijet said. The Volantens love their freehold. They will not help you to reclaim your throne if you ever speak ill of it. Then I shall not speak ill of it, and why would I? Viserys asked. It has served them well enough. Exactly what you should tell to them, Tijet smiled. Then there was another clunk as the Hathory rolled over the bump in the path that was the end of the bridge, proceeding further into the oldest part of the city, and Viserys couldn't help but feel his nerves grow uneasy, concerned that he could have salvation snatched away at the very last moment, when they were so close, to having an ally strong enough for them to have a real and fighting chance of taking back their homeland. This was their last chance, he knew, for the other cities had little interest in his hopes and aspirations and claims, and the Golden Company had little love for Targaryens even with the death of the last Blackfyr decades before. Should they be turned away now, there was only uncertainty ahead, and the real threat that he and his wife would be the last of the Targaryens, no matter how unjust such a thing might be. He took a grape of his own, peeling the skin off with anxious fingernails as he looked through the window, watching as the great gate of the Black Walls, a massive arching fortification, came ever closer, looming over them like a vast monster, and before it were no more than a handful of guards. Viserys ate the grape, swallowing without chewing, and then the Hathory came to a final stop, the elephant honking for a moment before falling silent, no more than 15 feet from the gate, the driver hurriedly opening the door and allowing Viserys to step out, as he did, followed by Tijet and Brandon and his sister wife, all standing before the great gate. And quickly, one of the guards rode forth, mounted upon a black horse, armored in scales painted purple and gold and with a violet breastplate that bore the city's crest on its surface, all half concealed beneath a tiger's pelt that was fastened with a golden brooch shaped like a tiger's head. Unlike the others that he had seen at sea, his helm was a cone, his face hidden behind a mask of metal shaped like the face of some twisted nightmare but for eyes of pale lavender. On his left arm was fastened a round shield bearing the 14-sided star of the old Valyrian gods, to go with the sword of Valyrian steel in easy reach next to his right hand. And not far from it was a dragonbone bow, long and curved twice in stark contrast to the great longbows of the Seven Kingdoms, its handgrip carved with an image of Balerion, the huntress god of the old Freehold and the namesake from which the greatest of the Targaryen dragons had taken its name, and on the same side as his shield arm was a full quiver. Ritzers, Targaryen Arakiros, the guard said with perfect high Valyrian, placing his hands over his chest, fingers splayed, to make the symbol of the dragon before offering a bow, one that Viserys returned before starting in the common tongue. I am Rhaegon Muhaerys, captain of this gate. What brings you to our fair city? I would like to pass through the Black Walls, so that I might speak with the old blood of Volantis and seek their aid in reclaiming my rightful throne, Viserys said, proud but with a polite deference. May I do so? Perhaps, the guard answered, his words a challenge. For what reason should the old blood help you? The Targaryens have long been friends of Volantis, Viserys answered. My father, King Aerys, had hoped that my brother Rhaegar's bride would hail from this city. We would be allies were it so, and the Targaryens of Dragonstone have long been friends of the people of Volantis. And enemies just as often, the guard said coldly. It was your forefather, Aegon the Conqueror, who broke our city's might and left us weak. It has taken centuries to recover from his blow. Centuries, when we would have otherwise restored the freehold. And it was also us who helped you to rise once more after breaking the might of the three daughters, Viserys replied. House Targaryen and the old blood are cousins. We might feud, as cousins do, but when we need one another's aid we have never once turned you down. Will you not do the same for us? Rhaegar was quiet, then, and a minute passed in grim silence, and for a moment Viserys thought he might have ruined everything with his words, squandered the future of all Targaryens with a rash reply or with a forgotten etiquette. Then, with a look towards Rhaegar's eyes, Viserys knew he was smiling. Very well, came the answer at last. You are welcome, Targaryen, as any who might trace their lineage to the Lord's freeholder are. Your passage was never in question, only your reasoning to do so. Thank you, Viserys smiled. I will be sure to remember you when I claim my throne. I thank you for the generous offer, but duty is my reward, came the Muheri's answer. I need to know only one more thing, with whom shall you be staying? You must surely have some friend who might be notified of your arrival. Viserys was quiet, then. As much as I might wish it, I cannot allow you into the city should you not have someone with which to stay as a guest, Rhaegar then said, grimly. Though perhaps you could make arrangements to visit. Lena Lorys Tivette said then, stepping forward. And then Rhaegar looked to him, and Viserys knew in an instant that the two men had met before. Oh. It is you. The Lannister. Did you not learn the price of making trouble in our walls before? Was the warning unclear? Apparently not, Tivette said. But you know as well as I that I am a friend of Lena's. Very well, but I doubt the Triax shall be so generous this time if you make trouble once more, Rhaegar answered as he raised his right hand and snapped his fingers. The warning will not be a warning this time. What has he done? Viserys asked, confused, as the gate began to open. He knows what he did, Rhaegar answered, saying nothing more before pointing towards the opening gate, one of the guards turning over a great hourglass that began trickling sand. Pass through. The gates will be open for 1 hour, no longer, so make your passage now whilst you have time. Your Hatharai shall be allowed passage so that you might bring your belongings. The Lannister knows where you wish to go. Now go, the sooner he is out of my sight, the sooner my day might improve. Viserys looked to Tivette, stunned and wondering. It's complicated, Your Grace, the Lannister answered, starting to walk towards the gate, the Hatharai close behind as soon as the driver urged the pale beast to move again. We best hurry. Lena's manse is close to the entrance, so we will not need to walk far. Then we best be going, Viserys said. I am sure you will have time to explain everything. Oh, he will, Rhaegar murmured, returning to his guard post. At dinner, Tivette said quickly as Brandon followed, escorting their queen. Then I'll tell you everything. Fair enough, Viserys said, walking to his sister-wife's side, taking her arm in his as they passed through the gate. Only to see a great tunnel that lead off at a diagonal from the main gate, the passageway lit by dozens of braziers placed inside alcoves in the walls just beneath 3 floors worth of arrow slits, polished mirrors behind shining their light into the tunnel, and above, portcullises, one after another, like the fangs of a monster ever threatening to come down. He followed Tivette, trusting in his lead, and they walked down the tunnel only for it to suddenly snap back towards its previous path, a great V-shaped tunnel that would render the gatehouse impossible to storm by even the greatest army in the world, with 7 gates in total on each side, making for 14, the holiest number for the Valyrians and the same number that there were flames in the land of the long summer. Passing through, he felt his sister's disoriented steps, still sick and tired from the long voyage, and he did everything he could to keep her upright, letting her put all her weight on him to make sure that she would not fall. And so they went, through the tunnel. And when they reached the opposite side of the entrance, he saw paradise. Everywhere his eyes fell, he saw perfection, in the form of the perfectly straight and exactly measured roads to the beautiful, golden domes of the palaces and temples and meeting places and the pavilions of gardens, all bearing 14 lines that expanded out from the middle, so that viewed from above it would look a field of the Valyrians' most holiest of symbols. There was no dirt or grime in the streets, no, nor even the first trace of rubbish, for a complex series of sewers and plumbing kept such filth out of the gutters that contained only leaves and other such things, and there were gardens everywhere, to break up the fields of black and gold that were before him, filled with brightly colored flowers that were once found in the land of the long summer in the days before the doom, beautiful things of red and blue and gold and yellow and green, mixed. with well-trimmed fruit trees flowering in the warm summer air, and the largest buildings of all, those of the wealthiest people within this city within a city, had open-topped towers like those of Valyria of old, great spires which emerged just above the black walls and allowed the ones at their summit to look out and see the world beyond their protective barricade, and in the center of it all was a great fortress turned palace, the original heart of Volantis and where the old garrison that had stood on guard, forever watching the waters of the Rhone, had slept and ate and made ready for war, a castle that bore all the familiar draconic features of Dragonstone and had the same style of tower and even the same hue of stone, and just looking at it filled him with a rush of warmth and nostalgia. Viserys, his sister whispered. Is this what home is like? This is what Dragonstone looks like, sweet sister, he said with a smile, pointing towards the fortress heart. That is what it looks like. His sister looked towards it, and smiled, ever so slightly. It's beautiful. He felt as though he was home, at long last. He saw people, men and women who were silver-haired and violet-eyed like him, walking and talking with one another in the streets, happy and utterly without worry, laughing and peaceful in the quiet and safe confines of the black walls, where the only sound was that of like-minded friends and the soft sound of the winds rustling through tree leaves and blades of grass alike. This was how he wished his life could be, utterly without the need to worry about finding food or water to nourish him and his sister or a place for them to stay at night, without the risk of being found and gutted by the usurper's blades, without needing to worry about being rejected by magister and mercenary captain alike no matter how much he might offer them to take up his cause, all that and so much more, utterly carefree. At last, after so many years of running, he found a place that felt like home. Come along now, your grace, Tidget smiled, taking off his helmet and throwing his hair to the side, long locks of Lannister gold flowing freely. Lena will be sitting down for dinner in but a few hours, so she will need to know she has guests if we're going to have something to eat, so we best hurry. Come, wife, it seems we have a feast to attend. Viserys laughed with his sister, the two walking together as the Hathori followed them just as they followed Tidget, Brandon whistling cheerfully as his eagle circled overhead. Tidget led them down the road and then left, heading down another street before turning right, clearly knowing the exact way by memory alone, and there it was, a small but well-built manse of 2 floors, a square building but one with a large dome atop in the middle, above what was surely the main bedroom or perhaps a dining room of some kind. He couldn't be sure without seeing the inside, but there was a balcony attached to the floor that was supported over the entryway by great columns of perfect black stone, all of it built well and all of it furnished well too, and that was good enough for Viserys. And on the balcony was a beautiful woman dressed in violet whose silver hair was streaked with gold, just as Elena Targaryen's had been a century before, and she looked down in surprise at their approach, staring at Tygg, she shouted in surprise. Hello, Lena, the Lannister shouted back. I've brought guests. Lena moved quickly, rushing back inside, and Viserys smiled as they ascended the steps and stepped beneath the balcony, its bricks providing a cool respite from the baking noon sun, standing before a great door of dark ebon wood. He heard the clatter of a lock and the shifting of a bolt, and then the door opened, and Lena stood before them, in the doorway of a lavishly decorated hall, a place like that of a castle writ small, with a long table of 12 seats on either side and something not quite like a throne at the very end with a hearth behind it flanked by staircases that led to the upper floors of the manse, and a tiger's pelt on the floor, long and proud and bringing precious color to the room. Then Lena stepped forth, and gave Tidget a kiss. You said you would come back, she smiled. I told you I would, the Lannister answered, returning her smile. Then there was the crack of Lena's backhand striking him round the cheek, a blow that caught the veteran knight by surprise and sent him reeling, clutching at his cheek. What in the seven's name was that for? For leaving, Lena said with crossed arms. And for taking so long. I told you I would come back when I could, Tidget confessed, helpless. You have been gone for 4 years, Lena snapped. And not once did I hear a message from you saying whether you were still alive or not. For all I knew, you could have been dead. Well, as you can see, I am not, Tidget said. I am alive and well. And I have a surprise. 14 Have mercy, the Valyrian woman sighed. This best not be another one of your schemes to take back Casterly. No scheming, nothing, Tidget said with an innocent look on his face before turning towards his king and queen. This is Viserys and Daenerys, of the House Targaryen. Rightful king and queen of the 7 kingdoms. They are here to speak to the Triacs and the Freeholders about finding support for reclaiming their throne. Then he looked back to the Valyrian woman, smiling. I was hoping you wouldn't mind giving us shelter till we can meet them. For old time's sake. Lena stared at him, hard, and then she looked to Viserys and Daenerys and sighed before looking back to Tijet. Why I can never say no to you, Tygg, I'll never know. Come in. My home is your home. And with that, she stood aside, and Tijet smiled as he led the way once again, entering the Volanthen woman's home with Viserys and Daenerys not far behind, followed by Brandon, who gave her an appreciative nod before stepping in last and allowing her to close the door behind her, and Viserys looked around as she did. The manse was small, that may have certainly been so, but it was spectacularly comfortable, homely in a way that Illyrio's manse in Pentos had not been. It had a heart, a soul, and Viserys was not sure why. Was it because of the warm but moist air reminding him so much of Dragonstone and the bright light outside of King's Landing, or was it because there was no formalities here, no incessant flattering and promising and everything else that he had been showered in whenever he had visited a Magister's manse only to be turned out onto the street at evening's end, or was it simply the feeling of being safe, for the first time in so long? He didn't know, but he prayed it would never go. Muna, came the voice of a child from the stairwell calling for his mother with concern, a young boy peeking at them all from around the wall, his hair more golden than not but his eyes still violet. Well, Tygg, I have a surprise for you as well, Lena said quietly, looking around in case anyone was listening in. Tigris. Come here. And with that, the little boy ran down the steps and stood before his mother, dressed in purple clothes like his mother. This is your father, she said, turning to Tijet, who looked at the child and then to Lena in disbelief. And this is your son. Viserys looked to his sister with a knowing smile, and she barely suppressed a laugh. Brandon shook his head, utterly unsurprised. And whilst you two get acquainted with one another, I will see to our guests, though I expect Brandon will want to stay with you and see everything for himself. Lena smiled. You know me too well, my lady, Brandon said with a bow as father and son looked at one another, confused as to where to start. As for you two, Lena said, looking at Viserys and Daenerys at last. I know little enough about the both of you, and if I was wise I probably wouldn't trust you simply because you're with Tygg, but, dinner will give us a chance to talk, I hope. Of course, but we will need a moment to settle in, Viserys said, grateful for her hospitality. Thank you for taking us in. At least someone remembered their courtesy, Lena said, glaring at Tijet before looking back towards Viserys and his sister. Please, follow me. I have a spare bedchamber for the both of you upstairs, if you would like to get some rest before dinner. Thank you, Daenerys smiled, before wincing and rubbing her middle again, uneasy. I'm sorry, the journey's been long. I think it best if I lie down for a little while. Then follow me, Lena said, leaving a stunned Tijet and a mildly amused Brandon behind in the dining hall, the Lannister at a loss for words as to what to say to his young namesake. And Viserys happily followed with his sister at his side, content, nearly as eager as his sister to rest in a comfortable bed again after so long a journey, and Lena led them to a large and comfortable bedchamber on the east wall, a place with a large bed covered in violet blankets and big enough for the both of them to share, its own attached privy chamber and more wardrobes and closets and chests than they had possessions for. But before he could thank her, his sister, weary, simply walked over to the bed and rolled onto its surface, asleep in an instant. That was sudden, Lena said with surprise. How long have you been traveling, for her to be tired so? A month, mayhaps a month and a half, Viserys sighed. We were wed before starting out, and we have done nothing but sail and travel since then, and she's been sick most of the journey. Sick? Truly? Lena asked. Did she feel any better when the ship was traveling slowly, or at night, mayhaps? She rarely felt better at all, Viserys answered as best as he could. She's been sick in the mornings for the most part, but she usually strengthened up through the day only to feel worse again as we pick up speed. And you were married before setting out? Lena asked. And, bedded? Viserys looked at her with as much confusion as suspicion. Sorry for asking, Lena excused herself, embarrassed by her prying questions. I just hate mysteries, and I thought I might have figured out what was wrong with her to make her so tired and ill. What? Viserys asked quietly, willing to know of anything that might affect his sweet sister's health. Have you ever thought that she might simply be pregnant? Asterisk 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 asterisk. End of part 20. Notes. I think this was one of my favorite parts to write so far, and I really hope that you guys loved reading it as much as I did writing it. Now, as I've mentioned before, I typically write 5 parts for a story and then go on to the next story and write 5 parts, but I'm actually abandoning that method in favor of another that should guarantee a more consistent stream of parts, because the sheer length of the gap between part 15 and part 16 was actually rather disorientating for me, since I finished off working on one story only to come back to this and have little idea of where I had left off, but I've seen caught back up on the momentum and I asterisk know asterisk where we were, where we are and where we are heading, and I've gotten back into the driver's seat for the characters, so the quality is once again back to where it should be, and in order to prevent such a massive gap again, I've decided that I'm going to switch stories with every part, so instead of having 5 parts, you get 1, but the gap between these parts is going to be quite fast, since it doesn't take me that long to finish a story and should hopefully keep me in the zone for every story simultaneously. And now with that said, on to the summary. Laughing smiley. This part picks up where the last Viserys part left off, with the passage of a couple of days that saw the Targaryens by passage on a transport ship from Pentos to Volantis and making their way there through the various ports, picking up supplies, etc. But we start right with the good stuff, and at the final leg of the journey, I don't really need to say all that much about Viserys, since I mentioned in the last Targaryen POV that he is quite a bit different from his canonical appearance due to differences in how his exile went. He's like a young version of Aerys rather than like Aerys after Duskendale, and this main difference is the result of a combination of a number of various factors, including but not limited to having enough money to not need to sell Rhalla's crown, which he passed over to Daenerys during their wedding night. Since then, the two have bonded quite a bit, and Daenerys has started the process of coming out of her shell with the encouragements of her new husband, who hopes to have a marriage the same way that he remembers the marriage of his own parents being. Rhaella, having shielded Viserys from all the bad sides of their father, has caused Viserys to have a very idealized idea of what a king and a queen should be like, but he wants to live up to those ideals and have a long and happy marriage with his sister wife, as well as hopefully having lots of cute children. And the first of those children is already on the way, as revealed by the last line of the part above. And on an equally important basis to Daenerys' pregnancy, we have the reveal of Volantis for the first time in this story, the homeland of Horono Veneris, and this was the section of the story that I enjoyed writing the most, from the appearance of their fleet in the summer sea to that first moment we see the city emerge over the horizon to the end of the part. Volantis has grown in strength greatly over the previous years, and this is primarily the result of many factors that I have covered before, but will cover again here. The growth of the north and its increased wealth has, as a knock-on effect, raised the wealth of all of the 7 kingdoms by quite a bit, with Dorne being the least affected due to being on the opposite side of the realm from the north, and with changes radiating outwards from Winterfell, meaning that the West AOC realms are richer and thus have more money to spend on foreign imported luxuries, whilst the canal has allowed the great markets of Westeros to be more closely connected with the free cities, bonds that were strengthened even more so by the use of Esso's knowledge in the final phase of its construction in the form of making the great locks needed for it to function as anything more than the world's largest man-made moat. All this has been pushing the free cities upwards as well due to the increased number of customers for their goods. But Volantis has been in a rather special position in that some of the goods they produce are also produced in Westeros in the form of the Dornish, and with the north and the Westerlands on bad relations with the southernmost of the West AOC realms because of such things as Eddard's journey through Dorne and the massacre of Rhaegar's children, which means that trade between them is not exactly bustling. Mostly because the Lannisters don't want to risk having their traders captured in Dorne and tortured to death or anything of the sort. And if you want to know more about Volantis, check out the comments below, since I've used up the character count for this note section. Tongue-poking smiley. Chapter 21, Bran 3. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Winterfell. Bran stood in silence as he turned and turned and turned and looked and saw nothing, only an unending darkness that passed from him to the horizon, a great abyss devoid of sights and sounds and smells and all the other sensations, with the sky above as utterly devoid of sun and stars as the void beneath his feet was of grass or stone or anything that his eyes could discern from the rest around him. Even the air felt like nothingness upon his cheeks, neither cold nor warm nor still nor moving, as utterly devoid of anything as the rest of the realm around him. Hello, he tried to shout, his voice leaving his throat as no more than a whisper, yet echoing across the distance like the fiercest cry. There was no answer. It felt as if he had never spoken at all. And so he turned again, thoughtlessly, only this time he saw one of the green men of his family's faith and who tended to the wood trees with bronze sickles and their leaf-colored robes, faces forever concealed by masks of pale wood, and besides him was another man crumpled over on his knees, grey of hair and clutching at a deep and bloody wound in his middle, a terrible cut that wept steaming crimson and one that had made him deathly pale and one that even Bran knew to be beyond the abilities of any maester, even their wise and clever Lewin. In the name of the gods, I do that which I have been commanded, the green man spoke, raising a bloody sickle and slashing the fallen one's back, an arc of blood spraying through the air and splashing on the young Stark's face and in his open mouth, flooding his tongue with the sweetness of sap, then doing it again, again, every hit striking flesh with the sound of an axe striking wood. Bran said the pained one, looking up to see the Stark, to meet his eyes with his own red, extending hands that were not covering a wound, but a bird, a raven drenched in blood. Forgive me. Enough, said the green man, his voice hard like iron and cold like ice, grabbing the fallen one by the hair, placing the bronze sickle against his throat before raising it again for the final strike. In that moment, the man let go of the raven, and it flew towards Brandon just as his head left his body. Brandon raised an arm to protect himself, to shield himself from its deadly claws, and then there came the song of a bow and the screech of a bird and the thump of it striking the ground and the fluttering of dying wings, and Bran opened his eyes again to see another of the green men, picking up the dying bird and driving the arrow deeper into its heart, through the front and out the back, holding it in place, till at last the bird fell still and lived no more. Only then did the green man let go, and only then did the raven fall to the ground, dead and lifeless. And only then did the green man look to Bran himself, taking notice of his presence for the first time. The other vanished. Fear not the raven, he will bother you no longer, came soft words that somehow filled Bran with relief, even though he knew them not. His time is done. Who are you? Brandon asked. And at that, the green man seemed to smile, even if the Stark could not see the face behind the mask. A friend. The green man crouched down to Brandon's height, setting bow aside and extending a hand that Brandon took with tentative, uneasy movements. The green man pulled him into a fatherly embrace, holding him with comforting arms that seemed to make all the unease of his strange surroundings and the strange raven disappear, and he could not help but to smile, but to relax. Then he realized their arms and their hands and even their breath was cold, an unearthly cold that chilled him to the heart through all his clothes and filled his heart with a growing dread, even if he knew not why, the way a mouse must surely feel when it was being stalked by a silent Tom. But knights shouldn't be afraid, and he wanted to be a knight, and so he looked to them, and in the green man's place was a woman who felt like ice, and who looked towards him with skin as pale as milk and a gentle smile and eyes like bright blue stars, beautiful and deep and yet so terribly wrong, for in those depths he saw a cold and frozen death, his death, the death of all who had warmth within their veins rather than ice, and the skin sloughed from her cheeks in a tide of stinking rot to reveal bones that gleamed with ice and rubies of frozen blood and fingers narrowing to deadly claws, and he screamed and cried and tried to run in utter terror from the ice woman and shouted and struggled as he felt her claws digging into him and felt a rough wetness on his cheeks and nose and opened his eyes to see his end and saw his direwolf pup, looking at him with worry before licking his face again with a soft whine that made the fear that had filled him so utterly a moment before melt away into nothingness, banished by the realization that it was just a dream and nothing more, that he was still in his home of Winterfell with his mother and father and brothers and sisters but a few minutes from his door, and that there was no black void looming all around, but his bedchamber, warm and comfortable and with the light of morning peeking through the crack in the window shutters like a sword, so bright as to make his tired eyes ache to see. The pup licked his cheek again, still concerned for him, and Bran laughed, shying away from the pup as he pulled out hands tangled in his blankets and sheets and picked the young wolf up before setting him down at the side of his bed. "How did you get here?" he asked, smiling as Winter, the first of the direwolves to have a name, panted with excitement as his master rose from his bed with a yawn and a stretch. "Bran," came the tired voice of his brother Robb, followed with a knock on the door. "Is everything all right in there?" "I'm fine," he shouted loudly, embarrassed to have been heard during what was surely but a nightmare and nothing more. "Surely. Winter just woke me up, is all." Well, it's time to break our fast anyway," a weary Jon added. We'll see you there. All right, he answered, climbing out from beneath his blankets, the feeling on his skin of the cozy warmth being replaced by the soft chill of the outside world, banishing away whatever tiredness remained inside of him, and leaving his mind clear at last as he looked to the door and saw it shut entirely before looking to the shutters again and back to Winter, sat happily at his side. "You were in here last night, weren't you?" Then he laughed, and walked over to his set of drawers, a thing that was twice as wide as it was tall so as to be easy for even a child to be able to open, one of nearly 100 that Winterfell had stowed away in the cellars for young children of Winterfell and of their vassals alike, each kept forever in case it might ever be needed again, even if only as firewood for when the winters grew too bitter and too long. He rummaged through them, one by one, and dressed himself in clothes that were tougher and harder wearing than the norm, knowing that today was the day they usually did their arms practice, and knowing that even the slimmest doublet couldn't fit beneath armor and would cause one to become far too hot, and that taking it off would have been a waste of time that could have been spent putting on his armor, or practicing his sword skills or his bowmanship or his riding or his warging or hawking or a thousand other things that were a better use of his time, and much, much more fun. He moved, stretching his arms by raising his hands over his head and moving them in a smooth circle down and around to make sure that they fitted him well, as southern knights always did before going into battle, so as to ensure that their plate was properly fitted and allowed them to move freely, before finally doing as his mother would have wished and combing his auburn hair right so that neither the royals or anyone else might see it wild and messy from bed. Then he walked over to the door, his direwolf wandering over as he did without him even needing to say but a single word, and undid the little bronze latch that kept it closed through the night before pulling it open and heading out onto an empty hall, the torches already burning and already filling the hall with a growing warmth greater than that of the hot water piped through the walls, and before he could anything more, Winter eagerly sniffed the air, knowing of the sausages and bacon and eggs and everything else that was being cooked a few floors beneath his feet, starting off towards the stairs on his own before scratching on the door with excitement. Brandon laughed again, and hurried to his pup's side, opening the door and letting the pup run out onto the staircase, the young Stark following close behind, watching as the little silver wolf ran down the first 10 steps only to tumble on the 9th in his haste and roll onto the 10th with a surprised yelp. Bran afraid for but a heartbeat before the wolf was upright once more and shaking its head in confusion and continuing down the steps a little more slowly than before, but Bran followed as he had before, watching and smiling as the empty stairwell began to fill with others, wards of Winterfell older and younger than he and guests from the southern realms, even laughing when he saw Winter pawing at the door that led to the hall behind the Great Hall, where King Robert's only daughter and his youngest son looked at him with amazement and genuine curiosity that even their protector, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Sir Barristan Selmy himself, seemed to mirror, if perhaps at only a modest level more befitting a knight of such legendary fame. "He's so fluffy," Tommen said with a voice filled with wonder, crouching down to look at Winter more closely, the young direwolf basking in the attention that they royals gave him. "Is he a wolf?" "He's a direwolf," Bran said with a smile as he walked over. "He's still a pup, though." "Are they also furry?" Myrcella asked, reaching out with a tentative hand towards the little direwolf, only for Winter to stretch his way out to her hand and lick her fingers, making the princess laugh. "Maester Lewin says so," he answered as Winter patted over to his side. "He said it's because of how much snow there is north of the wall, so their mother's milk helps them grow a thicker coat." "Their mother is here?" Myrcella asked, almost stunned. "Truly?" "She is, but mother has been keeping her in the Godswood so she can rest," Bran answered honestly as he opened the door and headed out to the hall, the prince and princess at his side and many of the wards of Winterfell behind. "Winter is supposed to be with her, but he managed to get out." "Is she as big as they say she is?" the prince asked as his sister looked on, walking alongside the two as the Lord Commander followed. "Can we see her?" "The direwolves of the Starks of Winterfell were said to be as large as ponies, my prince, and they were known to rip the arms from men grown whilst trying to play with them," the Lord Commander said with a softness that defied his age, his words scaring the young prince all the same and driving the smile from his face. "Your queen mother would not wish for either of you to go near it." "She wouldn't hurt them, though," Bran reasoned. "She's gentle and she sleeps most of the time so she has a chance to heal." "How did she get hurt?" Myrcella asked with concern. "Is it bad?" "She was charged by a giant stag," Bran explained, remembering it well. "We used our bows to bring it down before he got close, but he skidded and she still got hurt." "It could have been worse," but she needs a chance to heal. Maybe father would let us see her when she's better, Myrcella said, hopeful and smiling. He brought us all the way here, so if he wants to see her for himself, mother won't mind as much if we can go with him. I don't know, Tommen worried quietly, fearful. She could be dangerous. She isn't, Bran insisted. She wouldn't hurt a fly. You make her sound like a pup herself, Myrcella laughed. My brother likes cats more than dogs, or direwolves, it seems. A direwolf could eat me. Tommen muttered sadly. As if a lion couldn't, Myrcella japed, tapping the little golden lion quartered with the stag on the breast of the young prince's doublet, the prince laughing as she did. But you're wearing one right now. Are there still any lions in the west? Brandon asked, imagining great beasts as big or even bigger than the Shwolf herself, proud creatures with manes as golden as the ore beneath their feet. I don't think there is, Myrcella said. My grandfather would have one if there was. Oh, Brandon sighed with disappointment. I was hoping I would be able to see them. I've always wanted to visit the south, but father says I'm not old enough yet. How come? Myrcella asked, curious. Mother says that Northmen rarely like to travel. We don't have many jousting tournaments in the north, and I want to be a knight, he said with a smile. I'd be the first Stark to be one. Myrcella looked at him in surprise, both the royals and even the Lord Commander surprised by his words. Really? I thought Northmen didn't keep the 7. Most of us don't, Brandon answered. But Roderick says that it doesn't matter what gods you keep, since being a knight is about being brave and honorable and defending the weak and the innocent, and he's a knight too. And Sir Roderick is right, Sir Barristan Selmy said at last, Brandon's smile growing ever larger with every word the old knight said. Being a knight is about more than just the gods you keep, it is about an ideal. To be brave, to be just, to defend the young and the innocent, to protect all women, all these are the things that make a knight what they are. And that's what made you a knight, too, Brandon added eagerly and happily to the man who was his hero in the way that no one else was, not even his father, speaking with a tide of words that he didn't even realize to stop. I know all the stories about you, the tournament at Blackhaven where Prince Duncan named you the Bold, the tourney at King's Landing where you unhorsed Sir Duncan the Tall, how you rescued King Aerys. My favorite's the one about how you bested Maelys Blackfyr. It's what made me want to be a knight. And then he realized what he had done, what it sounded like he had done, like a boy speaking to his king and telling him of all his glories, and went wide-eyed. Had he just embarrassed himself in the eyes of the greatest of all the realm's knights, the man whose word could make a knight and unmake him just as easily, whose opinions could see a man be given the white cloak of a king's guard or forever spurned away from the chivalrous brotherhood? Had he just ruined himself in an outpour of childish adulation, ended his dreams before they had ever a chance to truly begin? He expected many replies from the white-cloaked knight, disappointed words and disapproving glares and 1,000 other things. But he had unexpected laughter. It seems news of my deeds has reached even Winterfell, Sir Barristan smiled. I am glad to know that they are inspiring others to heroism just as the tales of men like Sir Duncan the Tall and Simon Stareyes had done for when I was your age. Brandon looked towards the knight, blinking. You like the stories about Simon Stareyes too? Of course, the aged knight answered. His deeds are as legendary in the south as they are in the north, and you wouldn't be able to find a single knight in all of Westeros who does not know of his deeds and quests. He and Galadon of Morn, so true a knight as to have earned the maiden's favor, were my favorites to hear of as a page, and they were paragons of chivalry both. Maybe Bran could come back to King's Landing with us as a squire, Myrcella suggested to the Lord Commander with a smile. That way, he can see the south and practice to be a knight at the summertime, and father doesn't like Lancel very much either, so he could be his squire instead. Me? Squire for the king? Brandon said with hopeful amazement. Would he really do it? He thinks of your father like a brother, Myrcella smiled. And he doesn't like Lancel very much. I think he would be happy to have you there. His Grace is one of the greatest warriors that the realm has ever known, the Lord Commander said. There are few men who might make a better tutor in the ways of war. And with that, Brandon grinned in the same way that he had when he had first seen Goldwing and the direwolf pups for the first time, utterly enthralled by the idea of being able to serve as the king's squire. He had heard all the king's tales the night before, stories of distant battles in the south and the triumph of the stag over the dragon and of masterful tactics, and a chance to serve the man from whom the rebellion against a mad king and a mad prince took its name, a man who was like the hero of the songs of old made real. He would have to ask his father, beg him even, and if he said no then he would smuggle himself out of the north in the bottom of a chest if he must, for there was nothing in his life now that he wanted more but the chance to join the king's guard as well. And so he thought, thinking quick and hard as though Mayor Stillowin himself had asked him to solve one of his sums, even as they emerged from the hall behind the hall and into Winterfell's great hall proper, where the tables had already been set again by the castle's army of serving men and women and boys and girls, covered with cups and bowls and plates just like the night before, only less so, and with the great cask of ale that had been beneath the dais replaced with an open-topped barrel of milk thistle tea, boiled with honey and lemon and ginger, all things that were said to be able to fight the after-effects of too much wine and being steadily emptied with every cupful taken by groggy men and women alike, and it was for their sake that there was no music to go with breaking their fast and why the shutters that sealed the windows that would have otherwise filled the hall with brilliant light were only opened by the slightest amount, with the room being more properly lit by torches and braziers that burned more dimly than the morning sun of a clear sky, and everywhere he looked, he saw more reasons as to why his father's command to have no more cups of wine that he thought were necessary was right. Even Donal Snowstick and the small Janumber, the strongest of Winterfell's men, were clearly disoriented and weary from the night before, shielding their eyes from the light, and the smallest of all those men who were of an age with his brother Robb, Arto Swampstark, looked as though he was about to die in his seat, only his sister Lyanna looking anywhere near as bad off. And unlike the night before, Robb and Jon were on the dais so that the king might have a chance to speak with them, not that they were in any shape for such a thing. But when Brandon looked to his brothers, knowing how a man might look if he was still feeling the pain of having too much to drink the night before, he saw that they were the worst off of all, not because they had drank the most the night before, but because they were exhausted as well, with bags beneath their eyes and slumped over at the table, weary, to the king's amusement. You know you've drank too much when you're still drunk. The morning after Robert laughed, sat besides the Lord of Winterfell, who looked at his sons with a disappointed glare, only for Robert to look at him and smile. They're just doing what we did, Ned. We never drank that much, Robert Eddard replied softly. No, we didn't. We drank more, Robert said, taking a small sip of the tea before wincing and setting it down, pushing it towards the edge of the table where a servant would know to collect it. And we did it without any damned remedies, either. You're the one who drank more, Robert, not me, his father answered with a soft smile. I did, but you're the one who drank so much that you don't remember drinking more, Robert countered deftly, making the Lord of Winterfell, who was thought by so many to be solemn and stoic, laugh. I'd ask if you still remembered the first night at Harrenhal, but gods, you probably don't. And don't you blame how many years ago it was. That might be so, but we should still try and set a good example for them, make them grow up better than we did, Eddard reasoned quietly as Brandon and the royals and the king's guard took their seat upon the dais, before muttering a tune. They've hired men with sharp pitchforks, who pricked him through the heart. And the loader he has served him worse than that, for he's bound him to the cart, the king finished before roaring out a laugh. Gods! I should have come here years ago. Not even Renly knows that damned song, and he could tell you where and when a bard wrote a tune from the first verse, so much he loves his music. What song? Bran asked, he and Myrcella both curious. This one farmer's song from the Riverlands, the king answered to the both of them. We heard them singing it as they took the harvest in whilst on the way to Harrenhal, before the rebellion, and once you hear it you never forget it. Eddard agreed. Robert sang the whole song from memory after 6 cups of wine. It's a good song, to be fair, Robert laughed. Might be I should ask your good brother if he's ever heard it. He gets round the Riverlands enough with all that whoring of his that he's got songs about him, too. Both Brandon's mother and his great-uncle looked to one another, then, and said 1,000 words in silence as Brandon's plate was put before him, 2 rashers of bacon and 2 sausages twice as thick as his fingers and a fried egg that was perfectly done, all placed atop a thick slice of bread. It was a smaller meal than the norm, simply because of how great the feast had been the night before, but Brandon didn't mind, and neither did anyone else by the seams of things, with the great majority of the men and women in the hall only picking at it lightly, the wine of the night before having suppressed the appetite through the nausea that always followed too much wine, just as it had suppressed the spirit and made the room sullen and quiet. With Myrcella talking to her kingly father and his own mother and father talking amongst themselves for whatever reason was their own, and Brandon having thought that he might have bothered his hero enough for a day, he looked towards his elder brothers and saw that Rob was nearly asleep at the table, his own direwolf pup curled up between his feet for warmth and utterly ignoring Winter's attempts to play, dismissing his sibling with a wag of his tail. "Did you two go out late?" he asked, taking knife and food fork and putting them to food, cutting. "No," Rob murmured in reply, resting his head on his hand and only taking it away when their lady mother gave him a look, leaving arms flat on the table as he examined the plate before him. "I couldn't sleep last night." "Why?" he asked, taking the fork and impaling its 4 prongs through a square of bread and bacon and sausage and egg, all at once. "Did something happen?" John looked to him then, and he had a look in his eye that Brandon had never seen before, a look of genuine fright. "Only the most scariest." "Don't tell him," Rob answered wearily. "He won't want to know after." Brandon narrowed his brow. "I'm not scared." "Tell me." "No," Rob said again. "Please." "He wants to know," Rob John sighed. "It won't hurt him now." "Please." Bran repeated. "You don't want to know," Rob said firmly. "Well, I had a bad dream last night," he said, hoping that telling them what woke him up might pry an answer out of either of them. "It had a 3-eyed raven in it, but it died." Immediately, his 2 brothers straightened their backs and whatever unease they might have been trying to hide came rushing back to the foreground, with even Rob's pup seemed to churn and turn and whine with discomfort. Rob said with a sigh before speaking as quietly as he could, clearly shaken by whatever it was that he had seen the night before. "We were in the stairwell and on our way back to our chambers when we heard my pup more scared than I had thought a direwolf could ever be, so we rushed through the door and heard a sound. It was like something out of a nightmare," John added without looking towards his younger brother. "It came from a crow out of the window, and gods, I never thought I'd ever see anything like it. It was more than madness. It had 3 eyes, all weeping blood," Rob said with a voice so low as to not even be a whisper. "And it moved, but not the way a normal raven might. It was as if it was trying to do everything at once." Brandon shuddered, the words chilling him to the core for reasons he could not know. Was there somehow a connection between the raven in his dream and that of the one in the real world, some hidden meaning behind its flight towards him? Whatever the cause, his brother's words filled him with unease, even if Winter's playing licks and fuzzy warmth might have been enough to bury the fear that had come from his dark and twisted dream. And if so, then what did it mean? What had happened, for such a dream to have been so? Maester Lewin had once told him tales of how the mind was not entirely at rest when one was in bed, that even when in the deepest depths of sleep one could sometimes hear the sounds of the waking world and take them into their dreams, but if that was so, then what was happening before the bird flew? What were the green men doing to the old man who bled sap? And, who was she, whose body was cold as ice? He didn't know, and Brandon began to wonder if Rob was right and whether or not he wanted to know at all. "Brandon," his father said softly, bringing his mind back to the foreground and away from his thoughts of the previous night. "The king wishes to speak with you." "Yes, your grace," he asked, putting the matter aside. "My Myrcella tells me that you want to go south to Squire Robert started," Brandon's father listening in closely. "Is that so?" "I've always wanted to be a knight, your grace," he said. "I've dreamed of being a member of the King's Guard ever since I was little." "Have you now?" Robert said, leaning back into his seat, thinking, and then he smiled. "Ned. What say I take your boy south with me when we leave, to Squire Robert?" I know you're thinking he'll learn bad habits from me or something," the king interrupted with a laugh. "But Sir Barristan has no squire, and if your son wants to be a knight, he may as well learn from the best. If that is no issue for you, Selmy. If his grace wishes for me to take him as my squire, then I shall teach him all that I know." Sir Barristan Selmy obeyed as Brandon looked on with awe and a barely contained excitement. And I'll promise him a place in the King's Guard whenever he's ready for it," Robert said with a shrug. "Knowing some of my white cloaks, I wouldn't be surprised if he could already best some of them in a fight, like Sir Boros." "Is this what you truly want, Bran?" his father asked, looking towards him with serious eyes and speaking serious words. "Becoming a member of the King's Guard should be a choice you do not make quickly, for members of the King's Guard give up their families to focus on their duties, the same way men of the Night's Watch do. He doesn't have to make his choice now, Robert answered. Might be he'll change his mind after a few years of squiring, either way, it won't do no harm. But being a squire will take him far from Winterfell, his mother said. Are you sure about this? I am, he said wholeheartedly, knowing for certain that this was what he wanted to do, what he wanted to be. Then I'll take him south with me when this visit is done, Robert said to Eddard warmly. He can squire for Sir Barristan and learn what he needs to be a knight, and when the time comes he can take the vows in the great September of Baelor and choose what he wants to do next and whether or not he wishes to join my Kingsguard. If he does, the king reasoned, looking towards the young Stark and giving him an approving nod. Then he can stay at the Red Keep till there's an opening for him and he gets a cloak of his own, or till he changes his mind, either way. Might be it'll do Joffrey some good as well, the boy's been needing a friend close to his age. And might be Robb and Jon can come with him, the king reasoned. They've been wanting to see the battlefields of the south and hear more of my stories, might as well do both at once and take them to Summerhall and Stony September and, the Trident, too. What? Eddard asked with surprise, he and his wife looking towards the eldest sons of Winterfell. Is that so? His Grace offered, Robb answered with a hint of his weariness, his words half a fact and half an apology, deflecting the matter towards the king. Boys are made for traveling, Robert explained to the Lord of Winterfell and his wife. It'll do them good to go so far south from Winterfell, give them a chance to meet people from the other realms, like you and me at the Eyrie did. Besides, it wouldn't be for that long either, mayhaps a month or 3 at the most. You can come along if you want, tell the boys about your side of the war. And with that, Robb and Jon and Bran all looked towards their father, hopeful. I will think about it, Eddard sighed. But I do not wish to hear of you making any more offers without telling them to me first, Robert. Fair enough, Ned the king said, smiling. That's the least I can do for your hospitality. Brandon wasn't sure what happened, then, but he saw his father nod thankfully before turning back to his lady wife and talking quietly, too quietly for Bran to hear even whilst on the dais and in the dead silence of the court, but he paid no attention to that, more interested in breaking his fast than in listening in on their conversation or any other shameful thing, and his appetite was certainly alive even if those of his brothers were not, for he hadn't drank anywhere nearly as much as any of them, with even his sister Sansa having had more wine than him. Instead, he looked down the dais, to where Domeric Bolton was sat next to his beloved Sansa, listening to the words she said before rising from his seat and walking out in utter silence, a cold and hard look in his eye and sadness and worry in those of Bran's elder sister, but he was sure that everything would be fine in the end, and ate, breaking his fast and sneaking half a sausage under the table for Winter to devour with a single, delighted bite, knowing from the moment that they had entered the hall that he was going to get a treat from his master, something different from the milk that his mother Schwulf gave and which had given him so thick a coat, and the smell of it roused even Robb's pup from its slumber with a curious sniff, looking towards his sibling's meal with want before turning towards his own master and pawing at his legs for something of his own. Robb, hungover and tired, gave him a whole rasher of bacon that his direwolf was all too happy to accept. Winter looked at Brandon, wanting more so as to match his own brother, and so the young Stark gave him a bit of bacon too, the last piece of meat he had left on his plate and which the direwolf pup took happily, even licking up the little droplets of grease that might have fell from the fat and making him laugh at the sight. Time for arms practice, his grace asked, curious. Normally the Lord of Winterfell nodded. But with half the men still hungover from last night, there won't be much practice. Still, it would be best to keep them all in the routine of it, even if Roderick will teach them little today. They'll learn how to fight hungover, Robert said, rising from his seat. There aren't many skills more useful than that. Even his father seemed to laugh, then, before nodding to Roderick Castle further down the hall, Robb climbing to his own feet without even needing to be told to. Weapons practice, the heir to Winterfell said to his wolves, his voice showing both how tired and how worn he was from the night before. And so the wolves of Winterfell, the young men of the court, rose from their seats, the great majority of them better off than their leader, and Brandon started with them towards the door, only looking back to see Robb talking to their father and the king with Jon alongside, no doubt explaining why they were so tired and what had happened the night before, so Bran went onwards, going with the tide of men through the door and out onto the courtyard. And where an armored figure was waiting for them, leaning on the low brick wall that separated the main training field and the armory from the archery range besides, cleaning his sword with a crimson rag. His armor was a pink that bordered on red, a marvelously smithed harness of plate that covered him from head to heel in scarlet steel patterned with the telltale lines of flayed flesh, of the muscle that was beneath skin, and over his shoulders was a great cloak of skin-covered cloth dotted with dozens of blood drops of the darkest satin, all fastened by a pair of screaming faces, half-skinned and distorted by their agony. But it was the helm that caught Brandon's eye the most, a piece of metalwork made to look like the head of a man whose skin and fat had been flensed from their corpse. But in the shadow of the raised visor he saw the familiar face of whom such grotesque imagery was a sigil and not a nightmare. Domeric Bolton. Prince Joffrey, of the House Baratheon, he shouted, rising to his full stature as he tossed the cleaning rag aside, marching across the courtyard to the Wolves of Winterfell, where the golden-haired prince was stood, wide-eyed beside his hound. I demand justice. What is the meaning of this? The king asked as he pushed through the crowds in reply to the sound of his son's name, the Lord Commander close behind and with his hand on his pommel. Who are you? What has Joffrey done to anger you so? I am Domeric, of the House Bolton, came the answer, the heir to the dread fort standing before his king. Lady Sansa is my beloved, and she has made it known to me that your son and heir, Joffrey, has been trying to court her, all in attempt to steal her away from me so that she might be his queen, even though she wishes not. Domeric, Sansa said, rushing to his side. You don't have to do this, let me speak with my father. No, Domeric said with eyes as hard and pale as iron, like those of his father. He has insulted you and your honor. There must be justice. But is it true that you love him so? Robert asked, facing Brandon's eldest sister. Say, and I will have no more of this. But, Father Joffrey said. Let us settle this with a duel. No, the king commanded, his voice steel. I will not have you fighting for a woman who loves another. All eyes turned towards the eldest of the Stark girls, then, towards Brandon's sister. I love Domeric, she said, all watching in silence. We would be betrothed, but my father doesn't like betrothals. Is this true, Ned? The king asked solemnly as he turned towards his friend. Eddard answered. It is in case she might change her mind with age. I wouldn't have any of my children married to someone they cannot come to love. Then there will be no more of this, the king said, turning towards a stunned Joffrey. Leave her be, or it will be me you deal with next, and your mother be damned. Yes, Father Joffrey said with an obedient bow, turning towards Sansa. I am sorry for any disrespect, Lady Stark. Sansa seemed to relax at that, for the first time since the king's arrival, but Domeric stepped forth all the same. But honor needs to be sated. If he wishes a duel, then we shall have one for honor's sake, to show that justice was done, to first blood and nothing more. Then Sansa looked to her beloved in horror as Joffrey turned to his father, who simply nodded. The prince swallowed, and turned back towards Domeric. I accept. ********. End of part 21. Notes. Like usual, this was a fun one to write, and a challenging one as well, since I must have wrote and rewrote practically every section of it at least twice before finishing the part, but I think the quality of it all makes it more than worthwhile. Tongue-poking smiley. And of course, this is the first part of my new story rotation. Laughing smiley. That means that, instead of writing 5 parts per story, I'm only writing 1, so that means I'm going on to the Dragon of Harrenhal next, if you've been waiting for that story, but it'll only get 1 part before I rotate around to the next thing on my list. For those on alternate history, just check my status page to see what I'm working on next, since I post progress updates regularly to let people keep track of how things are going and what's being done. And, on another matter, I'm starting to second-guess myself about a certain decision, the inclusion, or rather removal, of italicized thoughts like this one. I started to think they were rather clumsy around the time that I wrote the first part of Raiders of the Lost City, my travel story about the adventures of Tyrion Lannister and a band of others setting out to Gogossos, but the more I work without them, the more I realize that they filled in a role that otherwise can't be filled without some really awkward prose in the form of providing a perspective into the characters' own views and opinions. So, expect them to make a comeback, but if they do, they won't be anywhere near as common as they were originally and in the first batch of parts for this story, the test parts where I mostly hammered out the setting, since I'll admit to overusing them. Tongue-poking smiley. And now, to the summary, and oh boy, where to start? I'll try to keep things short this time, since summaries are meant to be, well, summaries, not huge walls of text that are like a story after the story. So, short summary. First, we see Bran's view of the certain event that happened the night before, which should give some insight into exactly what happened, but I will say no more than that. I like to hear people their eyes about the way that the story is going, tongue-poking smiley. Then we see Bran and Myrcella talking amongst themselves and the first reaction of the royals to seeing a Rey Owl, live direwolf, though at this time Winter is little more than a puppy, though having his mother around to give him milk has accelerated his growth quite a bit, primarily in the development of a fur coat that would be necessary for any animal, and especially a newborn one, to survive in the frigid cold of the lands beyond the wall and in the cold snows of the north itself, right now. Winter looks more like a great big ball of fluffy fur than he does a direwolf, simply because the rest of his body hasn't caught up with the growth of his coat yet. If you Google Malamute puppy, you'll have some idea of what he looks like, and that he's not quite as terrifying as you might expect the pup of a horse-sized wolf to be, tongue-poking smiley. And of course, we have Brandon making his wish to go south and become a member of the Kingsguard known to Robert and the royal family, and it is a wish that Robert has decided to grant, and in a way that Brandon couldn't possibly turn down, a chance to serve as the squire of his most beloved hero, Sir Barristan Selmy himself. And of course things get messy between Domeric and Joffrey, as the former has most certainly not taken kindly towards the latter's attempts to charm his beloved Sansa, and especially not his ignoring of the fact that she isn't at all interested in him in this universe, and the part above makes it clear the result of such a thing, an honest duel with which to settle the dispute. And the resolution of which will be seen in the next part, whose POV character will be Sansa. So ends part 21. Laughing smiley. Chapter 22, Sansa 2. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Asterisk 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 asterisk. A few hours later, Winterfell. Sansa sighed sadly and quietly as she walked across the courtyard in silence. The rest of her family and their household and their wards and their guards and all the others who stayed within the walls of Winterfell going about their lives the best they could as the servants carefully carried out the immensely delicate work of creating an outline of brick upon its middle, the invisible walls of the arena in which the duel between Bolton and Baratheon would take place, walls that even her brother Robb was not allowed to come near for the risk of making the fight unfair. The prince was stood on the far side of the courtyard, opposite the Bolton and alongside his father and grandfather, the king watching with eager eyes as the men of the royal retinue fastened a suit of plate onto the golden-haired prince, Joffrey and the king talking quietly between the two, discussing tactics or any number of things outside the range of her hearing, but it was the Lord of Casterly Rock who looked on to Domeric with unwavering eyes of green. Eyes that made her fear for her betrothed and all the more resentful that he saw fit to duel the prince for the sake of his honor. "Must you do this?" she asked as the Bolton was sat upon a stool, visor raised to let him breathe and to keep him cool before the start of the fight. "I love you, not him. My father would never make me marry someone I didn't care about. It's about more than that, Sansa," he sighed, shifting his weight in his armor as he leaned forward. "I have no choice but to fight. I have to." "But why?" she asked. "Why must you risk everything for this, Domeric? You probably think I'm doing it for honor, don't you?" he said, the hint of a smile appearing on his cheeks as he turned to face her. "I'm not, Sansa." "Then if not for honor's sake, then why?" "I have no choice," he answered solemnly. "If I don't fight for you, then people would think that I don't love you nearly as much as I do. They would think that I am lying. I have to fight him, Sansa. I have to fight him for you." "But I don't want you to fight him," she said, her growing fear and unease spreading into her voice. "What if you get hurt? What if you lose?" "You don't understand," he sighed again, the struggle to put his reasoning into words clear on his face. "This is just what men have to do." Came the voice of the king as he strode across the courtyard, the towering and broad-shouldered Baratheon meeting the two with a warm voice. "It is." "Can't you stop this, Your Grace?" she asked quickly and quietly. "I love Domeric." "Love isn't the matter that causes the duel," the king explained, saying what Domeric couldn't, the Bolton agreeing with his words with a nod of his head as he spoke. "It is that my son and heir tried to win your hand when you were already being charmed by another. It's a matter of honor, and not just his, but his father's and his family's, too." "Exactly," Domeric said to his beloved. "I have to fight him to protect you as much as to protect my family's image. It is duty of men, girl, Robert said, pulling in another seat and dropping himself into it. Any man would have to do the same thing. And then the king smiled, looking to the Bolton. I hope you aren't going to take this as a chance to kill the prince and call it an accident. No, your grace, the Bolton answered, seeming to laugh inside at the king's words. It's only to first blood. First blood can be last blood too if you strike him in the right place, though that wife of mine might as well think they are the same thing with how fuming she is about it all, Robert mused before turning to the Bolton again. I hold no ill feelings to you for this, though, Bolton. The king extended an open hand. Thank you, your grace, the Bolton smiled, reaching out and shaking the king's hand. For understanding. Well, if there's anything I know it's about this sort of thing, the king laughed. Win or lose, you two won't have any trouble from us again, that I swear. Thank you, your grace, Sansa thanked with a happy smile. Will Joffrey, leave me be. He will now, the king explained. None of us in the south knew that you two were together, you see, else I would have dragged him away the moment he said a word. We don't hear much about what happens in Winterfell in the south. We don't hear much about what happens in the south as well, your grace. Domeric smiled as the king's famous charisma began to show itself again. Is everything well? I wouldn't be here if it was, Robert reasoned. But it isn't so bad as to stop me from being able to come here to Winterfell for a while and leave my brother Renly to sit the throne for a while. I'm looking for a hand. My father would be happy to take the role, your grace, Domeric said. He would, Robert laughed. But I don't think the rest of the realm would be so happy to see him in King's Landing. They had enough of him in the south during the rebellion. And besides, he's too quiet for the capital. You met Lord Bolton? Sansa asked. I must have met half the lords of Westeros during the war, the king answered, reminiscing with a smile. We didn't talk much. He was too quiet, quieter than your father for certain, and never one for japes as well. He would have probably slaughtered the prisoners we took as well if he was allowed to. That sounds like my father, Domeric sighed, Sansa nodding in understanding, knowing well how her beloved's father was from Domeric's own tales. Your grace, she said quietly and with discomfort. I know you're here to try and get my father as hand, but why is he here? Who? The king asked, only for her to flick her eyes towards the Lord of Casterly Rock and make the king laugh. Oh, him. I haven't any idea about what brought him north, and I don't think Jaime or that wife of mine know either. He came on his own. You mean he joined his party to yours? Domeric asked. Exactly, Robert shrugged, massive shoulders moving freely beneath his golden doublet. He came and joined us not long before we reached the twins. He talks more than your father did, but I would rather listen to Roose rambling on about how no one complains about animals being flayed but how doing it to a man is wrong than listen to Tywin say anything. That father of yours is the quiet kind of man, that's something I understand. But Tywin Lannister, Robert said. He's nothing like that. He'll talk with you if you speak to him, he'll even talk with you for hours, but there's something about him when you're doing so that makes it uncomfortable. It's like talking to a scarecrow. And then the king sighed, and then he laughed. So I haven't an idea what's brought him north, but if it's enough to get him to leave Casterly Rock then it has to be important, he finished before turning to. Why? Does he bother you? He doesn't scare me, Sansa said, her words half a lie. He just hasn't stopped staring at Domeric since the duel. I wouldn't worry about it much, the king smiled. He's just looking him over for weaknesses, trying to see if there is anything that could give Joffrey an advantage. But why aren't you? She asked, confused. Because this is something between him and me, Domeric explained, the king nodding. He's done wrong and I have to be the one to right that wrong, that's why it is just the two of us and no one else. Exactly so, the Baratheon smiled before turning to Sansa. Win or lose it makes little difference. Once the matter of honor's been dealt with he won't bother either of you again, and that goes for Tywin and Joffrey both. Is it so surprising that I don't mind if my son loses? It is, she said honestly. I had hoped that your father and I would have been able to make a marriage between our houses, the one that should have been, the king said, his voice growing more somber for a moment before he forced it out and returned to his more jovial self. But there are always more women around for Joffrey, and I would never force a woman, Stark or not, to marry him if they didn't want it. Because of You needn't ask, the king said firmly, iron forming in his voice before he relaxed and let himself smile, an idea coming to mind. Besides, you two seem happy enough together. Haven't you a sister, too? I do. She's only 8, so she hasn't found anyone she likes enough to marry, though. Might she be interested in Joffrey? The king asked, intrigued. She would be a queen, the mother of the realm, free to do whatever she willed and with all the ladies of the realm looking to her for guidance. I don't think you know my sister very well, Your Grace, Sansa said, allowing herself to laugh. She's not very ladylike. She would go hunting if our mother let her, and she sneaks off into the city. So she's tough, then? I would say so, Sansa thought for a moment before nodding. She likes to tell people what to do, too. All the better, Robert said, a smile forming on his face. I'll have to speak to your father about it all, but mayhaps, if she's willing, that sister of yours will be queen someday. Knowing Arya, she would love to be able to boss people around and make them do whatever she wants. Domeric laughed. Queen Arya, commander of men. Sansa and the king both laughed at that. And then Roderick walked over, his cloak fastened tight around him, and Sansa looked forward to see the crown prince stood on the opposite side of the courtyard, encased in plate from head to heel, armor of the highest quality and of the latest design, forged in King's Landing by master armorers and expertly fitted to him so as to not impede his movements in the slightest. It was a prince's plate, worn so easily upon him as to be more like a second skin than not, and making even the armor of her brothers look crude in comparison, polished to a shining silver perfection but for the few imperfections that were the scratches of time spent on the practice field. But it was the breastplate that caught her eye, where the stag and the lion were etched into the metal, face to face. The entire courtyard fell silent at the sight of the prince and his golden curls and the antlered helm beneath his arm, whatever arrogance he might have had vanquished by the realization of what it was that he was expected to do next, and replaced by utter seriousness and a little unease befitting his youth of 2 and 10 name-a-days, a stark contrast to Domeric's calm certainty. The 7 and 10-year-old Bolton, nearly a man grown and towering just shy of a foot over the crown prince, and she felt her heart rise inside of her chest at the sight. Domeric was going to win. She could feel it. It is time, my lord, the master of arms said with a slight bow, giving the Bolton heir a lord's courtesy. Only you. Everyone else must stay 10 feet away, so that none can interfere. I'll see you again soon, my lady, Domeric said with a smile as he rose from his seat, revealing his height for all to see before striding across the courtyard and into the square of bricks. And there, he spoke with his opponent, the two saying words too quiet for Sansa to hear from so far away. Prince and heir stood face to face as a Septon, and one of the green men spoke the words and made it clear that the gods, old and new, were watching. That the duel would be won by the righteous one. Is the prince any good at fighting, your grace? She asked, turning to the king. He's not too bad, the king said honestly. Not great, but good enough to get by. I would have been able to make a warrior out of him if his mother had let me start training him sooner. He'll probably lose, but he'll put up a fight. Why? How good is that Domeric of yours? He's not the best sword in Winterfell, she said. That's Jon, but he's good. When I was young, Jon Arryn told me it was always hard to measure how good a swordsman was, Robert said. Some knights are alright, some are good, some are great and some are excellent, and then you get men like Arthur Dayne. Then he's great, your grace. Robert asked, only for her to nod as he turned to the front. Then this should be a short enough fight. For a moment, there was silence as the master of arms and the men of faith departed from the square, leaving the two to face one another. Do you really want my sister to marry Joffrey? She asked quietly, watching as a servant brought her Domeric his sword, a long sword etched with crimson drops and with a screaming face for a pommel. Some men think I'm a fool, Robert said lowly, watching as his son raised his sword, the two men circling one another in their arena to the near silence of all, watching for an opening through the narrow slits of their visors. They think I only think with my hammer. Then there was the clang of the first strike, the high wail of steel on steel echoing through the open courtyard and off the walls in a way that practiced swords never could. Her attention snapped towards the fight, to her Domeric, the Stark girl staring to see that it had been the prince to have struck the first blow, a scratch across the Bolton's plate revealing the true color of the metal beneath, but Domeric wasted no time in making a counter his own, bringing his sword up to catch the Baratheon blade on the crossguard, Joffrey yelping with pain as the force of his own strike reverberated up his sword and up his arm and into his shoulder. And with that, Domeric took his chance and threw his weight forward, grabbing the middle of his sword with an armored hand as he pushed himself onwards, sending the Baratheon staggering in retreat before hurling himself onto him with a shove and a kick at the exact moment the Crown Prince took his foot off the ground, the two men crashing against the stones of the courtyard with a booming clatter of metal plates rolling and groaning and clashing against one another in a brawl she could barely see in the shining of their armor and in the fast, frenzied movements of the two struggling against one another. "I'm no fool," Robert said. "I've been in dozens of battles and only ever lost one, and I've never lost a melee, not even at Harrenhal when Arthur Dayne and Barristan Selmy were there. I know what a good marriage will mean, and marrying my son and heir to a northern girl is the best marriage I could hope to have." "But what about the Reach?" she asked. "Don't the Tyrells have a daughter?" "Aye, they do, and Renly's been trying to throw her at me for years," the king laughed. "No, a Tyrell would be good, but there's better, and that sister of yours, Arya, is the best. As many men as the Reach, but with an alliance with the Riverlands as well and a fleet too." "She's only 8," Sansa said, unsure of whether or not her sister was old enough to be able to make such a choice herself. "She's too young to be married. Your father killed his first man at 10, did he ever tell you that?" Sansa looked to the king then, surprised, only the ladylike grace that was expected of the eldest daughter of Winterfell stopping him from being able to see that he had caught her off guard. "He never told us," she admitted quietly. "Who was it?" "A mountain clansman, in the Vale," Robert said, watching as Joffrey managed to slide from the Bolton's grip and kick Domeric's helm as he did, the Bolton snapping backwards and dazed as the metal rung like a bell. "We were on the way to Runestone for a feast when they came upon us from the woods. I hadn't even had a chance to raise my weapon before they started running away again, realizing we were more heavily armed than they thought we were, but not before that father of yours ran some poor sod through left to right, from one side to the other." "Gods, I remember his face when he realized what he had done," Robert murmured. "He was more dazed than anything else, but it was having to give the man mercy afterwards that made him realize what death was. Before then he had been more like Brandon." "My uncle." "Your brother," the king explained. "It made him grow up. He stopped being a boy and became a man, and I think the same thing happened to you." "Your Grace," she asked, confused. "You're closer to my Myrcella in age than you are to Domeric," the king said. "But you're acting more like a woman thrice your age than a girl like her." "How so?" she asked. "The way you talk is one," the king laughed. "You're too proper for your age. You're more formal than I am, girl, and more than Ned or Jon ever were." And then the king softened, and he met her with an understanding eye. "Don't be so quick to try and make yourself grow up. You'll have plenty of time to be a lady when you're older, but for now, there's nothing wrong with having fun and relaxing whilst you still can. You only get one chance at it, you might as well spend it well." She murmured, thinking, and then she smiled. "Thank you, Your Grace. I'll try to remember that." And with that she turned her attentions to the fight once more, and saw to her horror that her Domeric was losing, not quickly, but slowly, slowly being battered down, slowly being worn out, slowly being hammered into submission with fist and foot and blade, the Bolton running out of stamina and overheating inside his armor in a way that the younger Baratheon and his beautifully forged plate did not. Domeric fell backwards, towards the edge of the arena, and her eyes widened as a roar began to rise from the crowds as he shook with a failing balance, threatening to fall out from within the confines of the arena, to lose, heels trembling. And then he found his balance again, and when the Baratheon prince threatened to push him out again he grabbed him by the wrist, whatever confidence the Bolton heir might have had long since replaced by grim determination and whatever honor replaced by a desire and a willingness to do whatever it took to win. A cunning that his family was well known for and one that had been sharpened and honed by years of reading and learning to enhance his intellect and mated with a warrior's training, for Domeric did not simply advance on him, he didn't throw an gauntlet fist, no, he slammed his armored head into the prince's own, their swords long since discarded for their armored brawl, the young prince reeling backwards only for her Domeric to advance on him again, darting across the ground with fast strides that were more like leaps than not, and it was then that he won the fight. Not with a sword wound to make the blood clear for all to see, not with a grapple to pin the prince in place and make it impossible for him to escape, not even by pushing him out of the bounds of the arena and forcing him to concede, no, he did none of those things. He took him on. Hooking his foot around behind the back of the young prince's, he yanked his leg back towards him and made the prince lose his footing, and as the prince began to fall, he kicked him, straight to the underside of his helm as the prince groaned loudly. In an instant the groan turned to an agonized shout, the white cloaks of the king's guard rushing over as fast as their legs could carry them, and with the queen not far behind, the Lord Commander leading the charge and stepping over the bricks and pushing the Bolton away from the fallen prince, Sir Barristan Selmy crouching down to Joffrey and raising his visor to reveal lips covered with blood, the Baratheon prince spitting it on the stone before opening his mouth and "He'll need a maester," the Lord Commander said to the king. He bit through his tongue. "I will see him there," her father said, stood on the opposite side of the courtyard from her and the king. "Maester Lewin can tend to his wounds." "Gods," the queen snapped as the crowd grew raucous, Lannister and Stark men jostling to see the blow for themselves. "Joffrey." "It was a fair hit," the king said, his mighty voice overpowering the crowd and bringing it to calm once more. "Joffrey, you fought well. Go with Ned, he'll make sure you're looked after well." The prince, his tightly shut lips covered in blood and his green eyes filled with pain, looked to his father then, and all Sansa saw was the happiest pride she had ever seen in all her life, the look of a son receiving the praise he so desperately wanted. He nodded with a smile, ignoring his mother's fretting, before turning on his heels and following the Lord of Winterfell just as Domeric walked back over to Sansa, his visor raised to reveal the flushed cheeks beneath and the brow covered in sweat. "7 hells," he said. "That was closer than I thought it would be." "Thought Joffrey would be a pampered prince, eh?" Robert asked before bursting into laughter. "He was a year or two ago. You would have had him in a minute then. I've been teaching him how to fight, and it's given us something to bond over. I'll make a fighter out of him yet, and a leader too." "He fought like a bear," the Bolton said with a weak voice, slumping into his seat, exhausted. "I taught him," Robert said with a growing grin. "You can't get first blood with a sword these days, not lest you want to kill someone. Plate armor's too good for it. He was trying to get you out the square." "He was," Domeric agreed, panting for breath, removing his helm and letting his soaked hair come free. "He almost got me. Give it a year and he will, if you want another bout," the king laughed, turning his eyes to Sansa. "We'll have to have it in King's Landing. Call it thanks for your father's hospitality. I think he'd be happy to come," she smiled. "Domeric and I have always wanted to see the South." "That's true," Domeric sighed, leaning back in his seat, exhausted. "But mayhaps we'll skip the fight." Robert laughed, then, smiling. "It helps if you get out of the armor quickly. It'll stop you from getting too hot." "I'll get up," Domeric sighed once more, pushing himself up off his wooden seat, staggering to his feet and needing to lean on the chair for support. And so Sansa hurried to his side and gave him her arm as though they were walking together like usual, helping to keep the worn-out Domeric from falling. The king, experienced in such things, rose from his seat as the Lord Commander came over, Robert reaching for the leather straps that fastened Domeric's breastplate together and loosening them, letting cold air into the metal oven that was his chest, and almost instantly the Bolton sighed in relief. "Who fitted this armor on you?" the king asked, looking to the straps before looking to Domeric's light eyes. "You did it yourself, didn't you?" "Everyone else was busy," Domeric said honestly. "Don't do it again," Robert said, knowing. "You did the straps too tight." "It seemed right," the heir to the Dreadfort answered, looking down for himself. "It is easy for it to go unnoticed," Sir Barristan said softly, looking for himself. "Your padding was being pressed against you the entire time when it is supposed to rest against you. You might as well have been wearing a blanket." Robert laughed. "There's a reason knights have squires to help them with their armor, and it isn't just because they are lazy." "Come on," she said softly. "We'll go to the armory." "Thank you, my lady," Domeric answered with a grateful smile, Sansa taking the first step and him following, the two walking together as the king laughed and turned his attentions on the other boys of the castle, allowing Domeric to speak more freely. "I thought I was going to lose," he admitted under his breath. "I hit him and then hit him again, and it was like he was made of iron under that armor." "He's King Robert's son," she said with a smile. "You wouldn't think it, seeing the hair and all, but 7 have mercy, he is Baratheon through and through when it comes to a fight. But you won, and that's the only part that matters." "I guess, but it was much closer than I thought it would be," he sighed. "I'll put more effort on the courtyard from now on." I won't have a fight being that close again. Maybe you could ask Jon for help, she suggested. He's one of the best swords in the castle. Do you think he would want to, he asked, hoping. I think he'd be happy to, she smiled. I'll ask him when I get a chance, Domeric said. What did you and Robert talk about, anyway? He was curious about Arya, she laughed. I think he's going to try and see if Joffrey will have more luck with her than me. It wouldn't be a bad marriage for her, Domeric reasoned. He's strong, and as queen, well, she'll be able to tell you what to do. Or else her husband would come and get in a fight with mine, Sansa laughed with him. That would make her happy. It would, Domeric said, growing more serious as they walked. It would suit her, as well. She's always been better with sums than dancing. So being queen would make everyone dance badly, Sansa laughed again. I am being serious, Sansa, Domeric said. She would make a good queen. Do you really think so? Sansa asked. Isn't she too wild? You know how much the singers say Robert loved your aunt, and everyone knows she was more like Daisy than not, he answered. It might help. Sure, she wouldn't be able to tell everyone what to do, but she would be queen, and that means she might as well be the king as far as most people are concerned. Servants, knights, even lords, they'd all do what she wanted them to do because they wouldn't want Joffrey to know that they didn't, and of course, a queen needs respect. She really would like to be queen, wouldn't she? Sansa asked with a growing understanding, an understanding that went beyond being a simple joke to something serious. Maybe I should speak to my father about it when I get the chance, he could talk to her about it. I think it would be great, Domeric smiled as the two came to a stop outside the armory, the Bolton giving her hand the lightest squeeze before letting go again. I'll talk with you more later, when I'm out of this armor. We could go for a walk, if you want. Gladly, she said with a smile, trying to escape the ladylike manners that had been drilled into her from birth for just a moment. I'll be in the Godswood till then. Domeric looked at her strangely, then, confused, and then he laughed in realization. The pup. She hasn't wanted to leave her mother for days, she said. And you don't want to try and take a pup from its mother, he said with a smile. How sweet of you. She has fangs, she said, making her beloved laugh. It helps keep her comfy. The mother and the pup. Haven't you came up with a name yet? Not yet, she admitted. But I'll think of one eventually. It'll be good. Well, I best get this armor off, he said. If your brothers spot me in it, I'll never. There he is, her brother Robb laughed with a japing, accusatory voice, walking over to them with a wide smile, and his friends behind him. The man who hit the prince. He'll hang for that, Tigette Stark laughed. What was it like? I've got to get out of this plate, Domeric said. But I'll tell you all about it inside if you help. Robb laughed with that, Jon and Brandon and even Arya too, and with that Domeric pushed the door open and stepped inside, and they followed, talking amongst themselves about how he had been able to strike the prince, how he had won the duel, but knowing how close it had been as well. That had only served to make it all the more thrilling, she knew, but some few of them were making jokes about how nearly lost to a man nearly 5 years his younger. But her Domeric took it all in stride, and she couldn't help but smile as she turned away and started towards the Godswood, humming to herself, thinking, and not so much about the duel as it was about her sister. Would Arya truly want to be queen, if she was given the chance? Joffrey seemed alright, and she might very well have paid him more interest if she was not already in love with her Domeric, and he was certainly no coward, certainly not. He had bravely stepped forward when challenged and fought a Bolton whose armor was adorned with screaming faces and flayed men. And if she did marry him one day, could they be happy together? As she would be with her Domeric. It made her wonder. Not just for what the future might hold, but what her sister wanted her future to be. Did she want to be a warrior woman like Daisy, or more so, like one of the Ironborn women captains and generals who slaughtered their way through the Riverlands in ages past? Did she want to have a family, sons and daughters to call her own, or would she do as Daisy's sister Alysanne had done and have a family of bastards and never wed? Might she even try to convince their father to give her lands of her own to rule in her own right, so as to make a branch of the Starks, just as how Elaine Stark had given rise to the Seastooks who manned the North's wooden wall, its fleets of hoaks and galleys on the eastern shore? What did she want? She was her sister, and even Sansa didn't know for sure. She thought, and thought, and thought. And walked right into someone walking to the godswood just as she was. She yelped as she stumbled on the stones, only to fall into their arms as they dropped whatever it was they were holding to catch her instead, tumbling into a surcoat of orange and black and white, looking up to see eyes of the darkest violet, so dark as to be almost blue, looking at her with surprise. It was Horon Veneris, the free citizen of Volantis who had come across the narrow sea to teach her brother the ways of war, a man she spoke little with but knew from how he had tuned Domeric's harp for him not long after he arrived, the harp a popular instrument amongst the old blood within the black walls of Volantis. "My apologies, my lady," the Volanten said instantly and with the highest courtesy as Sansa found her footing again. "I hadn't noticed you." "It was my fault," she said, "sorry." "You dropped your—" She looked to the ground. And on the cobblestones was a book, a thing of ancient leather and Valyrian glyphs undermarked by their translation in the West AOC alphabet. "Engines of War," by the legendary Valyrian war historian Emidon, a figure so famous for his accurate accounts of the battles of his day that even she, a girl whose lessons on history were focused more on household matters and the whys of war rather than the hows, knew who he was. "That tome has survived 400 years in a library," Veneris said softly, reaching down to pick it up and inspecting it carefully only to smile, the leather cover having protected the fragile parchment within. "And it seems it will survive 400 more. Is it safe to take it from the library when it's so old?" she asked, surprised. "Books are made to be written, my lady, and this book is still strong enough to be handled more roughly than not," the free citizen explained. "This is one of the only full copies in the world, though." "Sorry," she said again. "Ah, worry not," he answered. "There are a dozen of these, but only one Sansa Stark. The leather is strong enough to take a fall, though we should count our blessings that it hasn't been raining lately." Indeed, she smiled before looking to the book, realizing. "Why are you bringing that book to the godswood, anyway?" "I thought it would be a pleasant place to read it," he answered, honest. "The servants are replacing the shutters in my bedchamber. They'll be done by the evening, but that is many hours away and I would rather not waste time. The godswood is quiet, and more relaxing than I would have thought it to be. You've been there before?" "Once or twice," he smiled, walking with her into the wood and looking around with a wide smile as he did. "There is nothing like this in Volantis, not even within the black walls where the gardens and manses are as big as your family's great keep. Do you ever miss it?" "Volantis is Valyria's heir," he said with true pride. "There is nowhere in the world like it, but I would not be able to teach others the things that I have learned if I was to stay within the black walls." "How come?" she asked. "Is there a law?" "You could say that," he sighed. "Politics are, cutthroat is the best word I can think of in your tongue. The tigers and the elephants have been fighting for years, but the tigers have been winning and the elephants do not like that much at all." She looked at him then, her need for an explanation shone clear for him to see. "Volantis is ruled the way Valyria was," he said. "We have no kings, queens or lords and ladies there. We have men and women, who choose from amongst their own number who is to rule by voting at elections. Does it work? Well, I mean, Valyria conquered half of what it knew the world to be at the time, conquering all from the narrow sea to the San River, even Andalos, and would have made quick work of Westeros too if it crossed the narrow sea," he answered with a smile. "Volantis fought all of the other free cities and the Stormlands to a standstill on its own, and would have likely won were it not for Aegon Targaryen coming atop Balerion the Black Dread." "Did he burn them?" she asked. "Like at Harrenhal? Or the Field of Fire?" "A few times, but never to the scale of either," Veneris answered. "It was the sight of a dragon lord riding against Valyria's first and greatest daughter that made them lose the war. The men lost heart, and no matter how great one's commanders are or how experienced the men, a soldier with a broken heart cannot win. And that ended the dream of reforging the freehold for the first time," he sighed. The two stood but a dozen feet from the wood tree in the garden's midst, the great tree tall and broad and as white as bone, the citizen perking up with curiosity at the sight. "It is strange how there is nothing like this in Essos." "There are no woods in Essos," she said. "The children of the forest planted them and carved their faces." "That is where you are wrong," he said with a smile, finding a clearing to sit upon, the book in his lap. "Tell me, have you ever heard of the Ifaquivran? They live to the east of the sun, past the old kingdom of the Sonori before the Dothrakui razed it to the ground." No, she answered, sitting alongside, intrigued. Who were they? Allow me to describe them to you, he said with a playing smile. I imagine you'll realize who they were before I finish. She smiled back, leaning in and listening. They were small. They lived in forests. They had magic. And they carved trees. You mean the children of the forest? She asked with surprise. How could they have lived so far east? Live, he corrected. They still live there, if what the Dothraki say of woodwalkers is true. Even those mad savages are afraid to enter their woods. They say that a look from one of them will drive their horses wild. Skin changers. Exactly so, Veneris nodded. Valyria once sent an expedition there as a favor for the Sonori, a debt owed from the days of the last of the Giscari Wars, you see, and met them in battle, Veneris said. Did they lose? She asked with growing unease. The free citizen burst into laughter. They slaughtered them by droves, Veneris said. You cannot change into a dragon's skin. It is impossible. Valyria bound their beasts with magic as much as with whip and word and love. Dragons are too strong-willed to break even without such things, but with it they were impossible to take. They recorded such in their texts, you see. Valyrians loved writing, and Volantis has a library as big as the one in Winterfell devoted to dragon lore. Truly. Truly, he said with a smile. From floor to ceiling of scrolls and books all about dragons. How they breed, how they fight, how to tame them, how to armor them. Valyrian dragons wore armor, she asked with amazement. In ancient days, yes, he said. They often used to use sheets of dragon bone fastened together with iron nails or cut down like scale mail. It was strong, but flexible and light. It gave them added protection against scorpions, such as that which killed Meraxes. They made special helmets to cover the eyes, you see, like those that a knight would wear here in Westeros. You must know more about dragons than Maester Lewin, she laughed. No more than most Volantens would be able to tell you, Veneris said with a smile, turning his eyes to the book before him at last. My speciality is in warcraft, but there are men and women within the Black Walls who have devoted their lives to studying all that they can about dragons. They were more than war mounts, you see, no matter how much the singers here might say that they were used as tools. His voice softened. They were friends, as well, he added. You see, when a dragon died, in battle or otherwise, they were always carried back to the 14 Flames. No matter how far away it might be or how large the dragon, they were always brought back to the place where they had first came into the world. You see, we Valyrians believe that our gods are in the ground. Like the first men, she said, explaining for herself. My father always told me the gods are in the ground, the trees and the rivers, but mother says they are watching from above. Similar, but not quite, Veneris said with understanding. Ours are deep underground, and dragons were always thought to be their gift to us, so when they died they were brought back to the flame from which they had hatched, adorned with all the gifts and honors of their service, then cast inside and returned to the fire from whence they came. And now they are gone, she said. And now they are gone, he echoed, sadness in his voice for but a moment before he cheered himself. Still, if any man or woman within the Black Walls was to hatch dragons again, Volantis would be theirs to command. Dragon riders had the blessing of the 14 to be able to do what they did. To have someone bring dragons into the world again. But that is of no consequence, he sighed, turning over the cover and flipping to the first page. Dragons are gone, and they won't be coming back. How can you be so sure, he said, trying to raise his spirits again, as much as out of politeness as it was out of a hope to cheer the citizen she had saddened. Maybe someone will come along and do it. Maybe it will be you. No, he said, a sad smile on his cheeks. I placed my hopes in the unlikely and the unnatural once before, and all it brought was blood and tears. Never again. What happened? She asked, unable to help herself. My failure cost the lives of everyone that I ever cared about and loved, for a single brief moment of thinking that I was more important to the world than I truly was, he said with a somber voice, all the happiness leaving him in an instant, all the joy, all replaced by quiet melancholy that seemed to make the entire world turn dark and sad. It was a fool's action. I was a fool for believing in it, but I had believed it in all the same, and they died. My wife. My son. My daughter. My father. My mother. All of them. Oh gods, she said, seeing as the Valyrian was set to burst into tears. I am sorry. I never meant to upset you. No, it isn't your fault, he said, turning to her again, starting to smile ever so slightly as he forced himself through his grief the way only a man who had gone through it 1,000 times before could. I am the one who made the choice. I am the one responsible for all that happened, and I shall live with that knowledge from this day till my last. It is my fault, my lady. Not yours. I am the one who made the mistake, and thus I am the one to pay the price. Good men and good women alike died for my foolishness, for my dream of being a hero, he said at last. That is one of many things that drove me from my homeland, my lady. The memories. He breathed in, then, and sighed. Best not to talk of them. And then something clicked, something about the story he was telling her, something about the way he spoke, and she looked to him, and saw the lines on his face, the beautiful lines of any who bore the Valyrian look, yes, but familiar somehow. It was the eyes. Songs had been written with lyrics about those sad eyes. Are you Rhaegar Targaryen, he asked, quiet. She nodded, and then he laughed. Rhaegar Targaryen has been dead for 14 years, my lady, he said with a wide smile. We look similar, yes, for all Valyrians have silver hair and violet eyes, we might even be so distantly related in the past that we share a face as well, but we aren't the same. I assure you that. I am alive and well and he is dead. Sansa laughed, then rising from the ground. I'm sorry, it was a silly idea. But a funny one, he laughed again. Though it would be best not to tell the king or anyone else it, lest they start thinking that I truly am Rhaegar Targaryen. I won't be much help to Rob's studies then. I won't say anything, she said with a smile. But you do look a lot like him, or what the singers say he looks like at least. It is my hair, isn't it? He asked, curious about what made him look like the prince. It is strange, you know. In Volantis, long hair is a man's thing. It shows his seniority, his age, his power, for young men wouldn't have had the time to let it grow and warriors would have had it cut to fit their helms. Here, short hair is the norm. He shook his head, and she laughed. Sansa. Domeric said, stepping into the Godswood, dressed in his normal clothes again. Where are you? I'm here, she said with a smile as she walked over to her beloved, leaving the free citizen to read in peace. I was starting to wonder where you had ran off to, he said with a smile, giving his beloved a gentle hug. Did you find? And then there was a soft, quiet bark, and she looked to her side to see her pup emerging from a burrow that the Shwolf had dug for her pups, nestled safely beside an ironwood tree, thick grey fur mudded ever so slightly and yellow eyes filled with joy to see her again, the tiny wolf growing all the more excited as it rushed towards its lady's waiting arms. There you are, she laughed, raising the little wolf up to her arms, the shepup licking her cheeks and making her beloved laugh. Come on, my lady, we can take her with us. Domeric smiled, reaching out and patting the young wolfess with an open hand, the pup licking his fingers happily. It'll do her good to not be stuck in the Godswood all day. Sansa laughed, and with that, she placed the young pup down on the ground again, the little lady wolf sitting at her side happily, panting and ready to follow, and so she did, blushing as her beloved took her arm and as they walked out of the Godswood together and out into the city, King Robert and her father heading out for a hunt with the boys and the prince and anyone else who was interested, laughing at his japes and dreaming of what might be. And alone in the Godswood with none to see, a prince sobbed. Asterisk 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 asterisk. End of part 22. Notes. No summary this time, since I had intended this post to be a two-partier with the next one, but it's short enough that I don't think it needs one tongue-poking smiley. And oh yes, some people's suspicions were true. Chapter 23, Eddard 4. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Not far from Winterfell. There was but a light wind within the thick wood, too little to do more than rustle the leaves of the pines and ironwoods and oaks all around, the soft noise muffling the movements of the hunting party, but never for a moment did Eddard loosen the tight grip of his padded hands upon the shaft of his boar spear, looking around with grey eyes, ever vigilant for whatever beasts might be lurking within the dark depths of the forest. There had always been boar in the woods near Winterfell, their meat an ever welcome treat on the table, but there were bears too, black and brown and scarred and strong and with little fear for men after a lifetime of battling against wolves and stags and huntsmen alike, and though there were more than a dozen men there in his party, he refused to let himself lower his guard. The veil had taught him that. The clansmen knew how to keep their movements quiet in the hills and rocky forests of the Mountains of the Moon, and they had all the clumsiness of men. How quiet could a direwolf move, when its instincts told it exactly where it place its paws with its each and every step, how to make the least amount of noise whilst sneaking upon unsuspecting prey. The direwolf might well have been the symbol of his line, and his wife and children might well have direwolves of their own, but more Starks than he had fingers had died hunting, and more than a few of those had been slew by direwolves when they allowed their belief that the symbol of their house would never harm a Stark to overcome their caution. Even Targaryens and the Dragon Lords of the Old Freehold had made that error, as so many of the Dragoseeds had during the Dance of the Dragons, all believing that their blood would be enough to protect them from the wrath of a dragon only to be engulfed in their flame. He wouldn't make the same mistake. Something's been through here not long ago, the king said, crouching down in his hard-wearing boiled leathers, examining the small imprint of tracks on the soft, muddy earth, eyes following them to a small plant. Sir Barristan Selmy and Sir Aris Oakurt, honest men both, stood at his side with their white cloaks folded upwards to stop any game from being scared off by the sight. Hoofed, and not too big, either. Probably a young boar or something around that size, no more than 3 or 4 years old. He waved his ear over, using his finger to point to the leaves of the undergrowth. Notice that? Joffrey looked down, uncertain, trying to see what Robert was showing him, revealing the powerful hunting crossbow on his back for all to see. The king smiled. Look at the leaves. They've been flattened, see? And it rained before dawn, but there's no damp on them. What does that mean, Vather? The Crown Prince asked, his words made wrong by the maestas stitches in his tongue. When an animal brushes past something it takes the water with it, Robert said to his ear with a smile, rising to his feet once more. And that means they moved past here not long ago, and flattened plants spring up again not long after. Well spotted, Your Grace, the young Oakurt knight said with a smile. Are you Your father could hunt anything in the woods of the Vale, man or beast, Eddard said to the prince with a quiet voice, careful not to be overheard by whatever animals might still be lurking in the woods. I might not have a head for sums or know how to play a harp, Robert grinned. But this is something I know. We can't be more than an hour off, mayhaps closer if there be food or water near. We best move quickly, the Lord of Winterfell said to his friend with a smile. Else we won't be back in time for the servants to do it for dinner. And those wives of ours will be wondering where we are, too. Robert laughed, resting his spear against his shoulder the way a pikeman might his weapon before tipping his head towards the front and walking with broad, certain steps, utterly confident in his ability to cross the rough land beneath him as the brown of his leathers made him blend in with the trees and earth. Come on, we best be moving. Eddard followed, and so did the King's Guard and Joffrey and Jory and all the others of their small party of guards, but it was Theon Greyjoy who most paid attention to, the king having made it known to the Lord of Winterfell that he had to be there on the hunt so that he might have a chance to see what he could do, and it was he that Robert allowed to take the lead, him and Joffrey, 2 young men leading their elders so that they might have a chance to see how much they had learnt, to see where they could improve, and it gave Robert a chance to speak with him in the rear, with none other than Barristan Selmy and Jory close by. You look like you're worried about being had by an ice spider, Robert smiled. I am just being cautious, Robert, he said with a smile of his own. You know how these hunts of ours tended to go in the Vale. Only this time there's no clansman in the woods, Robert said. Nothing much to be worried about in these woods. Mayhaps so, but those pups needed a father, he reasoned. We found the mother, but not him. He has to be around here still somewhere. You think there might be a direwolf in the woods? The king asked, curious. Are you certain? She couldn't have made it past the wall with pups inside her. He has to be south of the wall, somewhere. The north's nearly the same size as the other kingdoms put together, Ned, Robert said with a clap of Eddard's shoulder. If he's out here, he'll never find us. I hope so, he said, allowing himself a jape. They said fully grown direwolves could take on 20 men, and there's only 12 of us here. Robert laughed again, taking a deep breath of the crisp northern air. Gods! I missed hunting with you, Ned. This is how it should be. We shouldn't be in our damned castles, letting our youth pass us by. We should be out here, in the woods, hunting whilst we can still do it well. My youth left me a while ago, your grace, Eddard answered. I've got grey hairs. But you were never young, Ned. Robert smiled. I swear, Jon Arryn must have wondered if your father had shown up at the Eyrie instead of you. It was Eddard's turn to laugh, then, and he did. It had been 14 years since the end of the rebellion, 14 long years since he had gone north with a wife and a newborn son, and Robert had gone south to his new seat with a wife and a kingdom, and it had been another 8 years since the two had last seen one another during the siege of Pike, where the Storm King had proven that the Ironborn's fear of flash and thunder was well placed when he led the men into the breach in the castle's walls. That was almost a decade ago, and it made Eddard realize how much he had missed Robert's words and japes and courage, the three things that made men willing to follow their king into the depths of hell on his command, as they had done at the Trident. I think about it too, sometimes, Robert said quietly, knowing in an instant what Eddard was thinking without a word needing to be said. I nearly died on that damned river, and gods know what would have happened if we lost that battle. Tywin might have marched on Riverrun rather than King's Landing. All the more reason to thank the gods old and new for the victory, he said solemnly before the king finished, not wanting to bear the thought of what might have happened. Robert nodded with a silent understanding, knowing that his friend wanted not to speak about it. Have you given any thought to my offer, yet? I'm still thinking about it, he said truthfully. Your sons and their friends want to come south, and that Sansa of yours and her love, too, Robert reasoned. There'd be no harm in letting them see King's Landing and the south, and it'd be easier to keep an eye on them if you're in the south as well. And if you're in the south, you might as well be my hand, Robert laughed. So I would be doing right by my sons and my daughters to come south with you, he sighed. Before allowing himself a small smile, remembering his own years in the south, in the Vale of Arryn, and how good and innocent they had been, when father and Brandon and Lyanna had all been but a raven away. His sons and daughters were part Tully, and Robb would be expected to come south with a host if there was ever a war that placed Riverrun in peril, and that meant that he would have to know as much as possible about how to act in the south and how to do his mother's side of the family right with his actions. Such knowledge had helped him a great deal in the rebellion, when all the other lords of the north were in a land where things were similar enough to be familiar yet different enough to be all the more confusing because of it, and in some ways, that knowledge might very well have been credited with bringing them their victory in both war and peace. It was the understanding of Andal lore and Andal traditions that his foster father had made sure he learned during his time in the Vale that had been the greatest aid, for it had told him that the Southrons placed less value on betrothals than Northmen, that it was not uncommon for a bride to meet her groom for the first time on the day of their wedding, in stark contrast to the many meetings that were expected in the north to ensure that both sides were comfortable with the union ahead of them. Before being carried off to the wedding bed, and that had told him that Lord Hoster Tully had no desire to wait for any sense of a mourning period before finding his daughter another groom. It was a wise decision in hindsight, as it had brought the great majority of the river lords over to the rebel banner, even if those in the southeast, the Daearys and the Wents, had risen for the Iron Throne instead, for it had surely shaved many months off the war and saved countless thousands of lives that would otherwise have been lost. But it was a decision that he could have only made with an understanding of how things were in the south, and what better way could his sons and daughters be taught such matters than if they were to visit the south for themselves for a while and see the differences with their own eyes. I know what you're trying to do, Robert, he laughed to himself. You're trying to get them to convince me to go south with you. The king answered with a japing voice. Is it working? Eddard answered with Robert's own word and a smile. I will think about it, Robert. The North's a busy realm, one that depends on Winterfell for guidance. I cannot leave it on a whim. But it won't fall apart if I leave it for a while. So long as you're thinking about it, I'm happy, Robert smiled. We'll make Jon proud. How was he? Eddard asked, thinking about his foster father. Before he died. It was the strangest thing I've ever seen, Robert sighed. I've seen men die, Ned, from all sorts of things, on the battlefield and off it from poxes or bad bellies. You know what it's like. But Jon, 7 hells. Before he died it was like he had become young again with how much work and traveling he was doing, and then one day he was on his deathbed. I've never seen a man fall ill so fast, and definitely not Jon. He was made from iron. Robert sighed then, sad. He called me to his side, and that wife of his too, and their son, and he kept saying the same words over and over, Robert said. The seed is strong. Again and again, it was all he could say. I thought he might have been trying to give Lysa some words for their son, trying to say that he was from a strong line. But I thought about it a lot on the way here, Ned, and I'm not so sure, Robert said quietly, stepping over to Eddard's side, as close as he might get. What do you mean? Eddard asked. That Lysa has the same red hair as your Catelyn and your sons do, and Jon Arryn was blonde like a Lannister when he was young, Robert said quietly before asking, so why does Robert Arryn have dark hair? You think Lysa might have given him horns? Eddard asked with surprise. Robert, we have to do something if that's so, we cannot allow a bastard to sit in the Eyrie. I know, Robert said quickly, cutting him off. She fled the city before I started north to Winterfell. Hells, she fled so fast she left half of her and Jon Arryn's things, and the more I think about it the more I think she might have realized that Jon Arryn found out. And that would explain why Jon Arryn fell ill so fast. You think she murdered him? With poison? The Lord of Winterfell asked, stunned for a moment at the thought his foster father had been slain by his lady wife before regaining his composure. How can you be so sure? I think Jon Arryn realized that her son didn't look like their father or their mother, and that'd explain why he was looking at that book by Mallion, Robert said bluntly. No doubt he was trying to find out if anyone on his side of the family had brown hair that might have skipped a generation and gone into that boy, only for Lysa to realize she'd been caught and poison him. I won't let her get away with this, Ned, he finished, a simmering anger beginning to boil beneath the king's warm, friendly surface. I'll die before I allow a false-born bastard to steal Jon Arryn's seat and the Vale. And neither will I, Eddard said, his friend softening again at his voice. Winterfell has a raven for the Royces at Runestone that could carry a message to the Bronze Yone. Starks and Royces are cousins and my father saw fit to have a raven trained to send a message there because of it. The Bronze Yone? Robert asked, reaching to his hard, clean-shaven chin for a moment, thinking. He's a good man, and true. Write a letter to him when we return from the hunt, Ned, and I'll stamp it with my signet ring and sign it myself. She won't be able to make a fight of it. The Vale loved Jon. But what about the boy? Eddard asked with concern as he stepped over a gnarled root. He remembered King's Landing, the broken bodies of children concealed beneath the cloaks. It was Lannister work, a cruel necessity of war, but still cruel, so immeasurably cruel. He's frail and sickly, from what I hear, Robert said. Once he's renounced his claim on the Vale, he won't be no threat. Only a fool would try and place a boy with a broken body on a throne. He can go to the Faith if they'll have him. Your Grace, my Lord, Theon said quietly as the rest of the men hunched low to the ground, a grim frown on his face as it often was. We've found it. Robert grinned then, striding to the front of the group with boar spear in hand, and it was then that the smell struck Eddard's nose, thick and heavy. Blood. Gripping his spear tightly he pushed forward through the rest of the group, waving the armored Jory over to the front before turning his attentions to the king, who dropped to one knee at the front of the group. Or what's left of it, Robert said. And Eddard looked to the front to see a large, muscular bear, a massive thing of brown fur matted with blood, fresh and old, scarred from a lifetime of battles against wolves and boar and other bears, cleverly using its deadly claws to rip at the carcass of the young boar before it, tearing stubborn hunks of pork from the thick bones and plucking steaming organs from the body, picking and choosing the parts that it liked the most, the way a lord at feast might cut out of the best parts of a freshly roasted goose. It was a monster of an animal, a brute that they might have lacked the numbers to deal with, but Robert only smiled, waving his son and heir over to his side as the mighty bear busied itself with its meal, the king giving his son directions without so much as a single word being said, but with a point of his hand towards his back and a gesture towards the bear's front shoulder. The prince, nodding with understanding and grinning at his chance to prove himself in his father's eyes for the second time in the day, took the crossbow from his back, pressing it against his shoulder, aiming with narrowed eyes, but before he could fire Eddard tapped his shoulder and gestured in utter silence to Theon and Jory and the rest of the party but for the Kingsguard knights, pointing towards a clearing on the left, the prince nodding and waiting as the others moved. And when they were in place, spears ready and Theon's bow knocked and ready for the draw, the prince fired. The masterwork Mirish crossbow let loose its quarrel with a deep, billowing thrum. The bear answered with a high-pitched yelp of pain and surprise, the steel bolt striking true and punching deep into the thick shoulder, burying itself halfway up the shaft in iron muscle and striking the bone within, and mayhaps even damaged the joint itself and crippled the beast. It was a strong hit, a good hit, but no single crossbow bolt would ever be able to bring down so great an animal with a single hit, no, and the bear swung round and roared with all its might, a deafening howl that was the closest any sound had ever come to the noises he had heard on the Trident 14 years before. Yet even with fangs dripping blood and deadly claws that could either pierce the protection the men of the party or strike with such force as to make it irrelevant, the bear hesitated, stepping towards the king and the Stark and the prince before letting out a pained whine as it tried to move its wounded shoulder. Turning to its wounded shoulder, it tried to pull the bolt out between its fangs, tried to remove the source of its pain, tried to free itself to be able to attack and wipe the lot of them out. Now! Robert howled, bolting to his feet, spear in hand. Joffrey, stay with Oris. Selmy, Stark, with me. Keep its attention, the Lord of Winterfell commanded to Jory and his guards. It can't fight all of us at once. Come on, you sorry lot. Jory shouted to the others. For Winterfell. For Winterfell. The immobilized bear looked to them with all the hate and rage and fury it could muster, but for a heartbeat Eddard saw fear in its black eyes as the party closed in from the front and from the left, flailing at them with its massive limbs and growling with every movement, the bloody wound it had received forcing it to limp towards them rather than charge, and unable to close the distance with any of them, the huntsmen were free to stab and prod with their boar spears. But even wounded, even nearly immobile, the animal was far from defenseless. Boar spears were short and heavy, best at allowing the momentum of one's prey to gore itself upon its tip than for thrusting, poorly suited for use against so large an animal, and one with a reach that brought it dangerously close to the faces of the men that had to get into arm's reach to strike it. Too close. Eddard moved around to the side with short side steps, keeping his eyes on the bear's long and deadly claws, but one of the men at arms grew too confident in the animal's pain, believing the sweet lie that its pain had clouded its vision and made it confused and unaware of its enemies, and it caught him. With a bang like hammer striking anvil, the maul-like paw of the bear's good arm crashed into the side of his helm, claws scratching the metal as they rolled off with a spark before the man crashed to the ground, alive but dazed. It was only thanks to the helmet and the padded underlayer that the blow hadn't killed him then and there, and it was only Robert sprinting around to the wounded shoulder and striking the quarrel with the blunt of his spear that stopped the bear from being able to grab him by the ankles and pull him into a vicious mauling before Jory could drag him out as the bear cried out again in agony. And when the bear's pain subsided enough that it could snap its attentions to the king with a hateful gaze, Robert was not so blood-drunk as to think he could take a bear on in a melee, leaping back just in time for the bear's claws to only smash the shaft of his weapon between his hands and not claw his middle. Growling furiously, seemingly unhindered by the dozens of strikes and having still more blood to bleed, the bear reached round to its wounded shoulder and tore the bolt out between its teeth, spitting it out onto the ground before placing a claw on the earth and beginning to advance towards the disarmed king, Robert moving as fast as he can, dodging, his every movement needing to be exactly right, to be perfect, lest the bear strike him true and kill him then and there. But as the bear moved, as Eddard's own spear sank into the fatty flesh of the bear's side, he saw Theon, bow at the ready, no more than 10 feet away, aiming for the bear's haunches. And when he let loose, he did so with deadly precision, striking both of the things that made the bear male with a single arrow. Its eyes went wide. Then it let out a screech that shook the forest as its legs simply crumbled beneath it, the hunting party cheering loudly as the bear crashed to the ground, all the fight leaving it, and allowing Robert to climb onto its back as it let out a pained whimper before he crouched down and sank the sharp tip of his broken spear into the back of its neck at the exact place it joined with the head, quickly driving the hard steel into the soft flesh as he locked his left arm under the jaw for grip. A heartbeat later the eyes that were filled with bestial rage were still. The battle was won, and the hunt was done. The king stood with a foot atop the fallen bear's head, the sound of his laughter booming through the trees, grinning just as he had grinned in all their hunts in the Vale and looking as though he had become 20 years younger again. But then the laughter began to turn to pain, and the king staggered away from the slain bear, leaning on a tree for support as he groaned, wincing and clenching his fists, Sir Barristan Selmy sprinting to his side as fast as his legs might carry him. "Your Grace," the Lord Commander said with a horrified voice. "Are you?" I'm fine," Robert said, panting for breath before letting out a laugh again as he looked to the friend who walked towards him with true concern. "I pulled a muscle is all. I'm not as young as I used to be, Ned, so don't look at me like that." "Jon Arryn was fine before he died," Eddard said grimly, the laughter fading from his friend's eye with solemn understanding. We best return to Winterfell before the sun sets. I'll agree with you on that, Robert said, gesturing towards the bear with a tired hand. We can't take the whole body, it's too big, but I'll be damned if we don't take proof. The head'll do. Jory, Eddard said, turning his attentions to the captain of his guard before flicking his wrist towards the fallen bear. Take the head. It'll take a while, my lord, Jory said with a smile and a laugh, sitting atop the bear's back as he looked down at the head. This neck is as thick as a tree trunk. I need to rest for a moment anyhow, Robert said, suddenly out of breath. That took more out of me than I thought it would. Robert, Eddard said quietly and grimly. That isn't a pulled muscle. It wasn't, Robert answered honestly and with a voice little higher than a whisper, only Sir Barristan Selmy close enough to hear. Barristan, the vial. The Lord Commander stepped close to his king, as close as he might dare, and it was only the fact that Eddard was stood so close to him that allowed him to see the King's Guard knight reach down to his belts and into a small satchel and pull out one of over a dozen glass vials, filled with a clear liquid that was dotted with thin specks of a thin, purple flower, carefully handing it to the king and using his fingers to hide it from the others. Robert took it quickly so none of the others might have a chance to see it was offered, and then he pushed out the cork with the tip of his thumb, letting it fall to the soft earth before raising his hand as if he were to stifle a yawn, downing everything that was within the vial before anyone realized it was in his hand before sliding the glasswork into one of his pockets. And with his words veiled by the sound of Jory hacking his way through the bear's thick spine, he looked to his friend with uncertain eyes. What was that? He asked. I've never seen you drink anything. And you didn't see me drink anything now, Ned, Robert said quietly, his voice turning firm. And you won't tell anyone what you saw either. Swear it. Robert. Not a word, Robert said, entirely serious and using the lordly voice Eddard knew he so rarely used. The realm depends on it. I swear it, Eddard said in honest understanding, bowing before his king and his friend. Not a word. Not even to Catelyn. Not even to her, he said. Robert smiled at him, then, and patted him on the shoulder before laughing, seeming to be gaining his strength again more and more with every second that passed. And find somewhere for that head. A prize like that needs a place in the hall. I will, Eddard smiled, happy to see Robert back to his usual self again, Jory laughing as he heaved the head up off the ground and into the arms of his men. Back to the horses. You heard his lordship. Jory commanded the guards, soaked in bear blood from the waist down. To the horses. There were a flurry of acknowledgements from the men of the castle, his household guardsmen smiling at the kill and talking amongst themselves as they walked, leaving Robert and Eddard and Barristan at the rear of the group, together, the Lord of Winterfell walking slowly to keep the king's pace. Thanks, Ned, Robert smiled, happier than Eddard had ever seen him. For a fine hunt. Anytime, Robert, he said, before letting go of his courtesies and asking what he needed to know. But what happened, Robert? And what did you drink? Nothing bad, Robert said before sighing. That blow of his nearly finished me on the trident, and it's been haunting me ever since. It never healed right. His Grace has been having pains whenever he does anything too strenuous with his left arm, Sir Barristan explained. The Grand Maester saw fit to give him something for the pain and to keep the scarring from irritating too much, but sometimes the pain is so great that even that is not enough. Selmy says it true, Robert said at last. But it must be kept a secret, Ned. I can still ride and I can still fight in the melee and hunt, but I'll be damned if the realm starts to think of me as a cripple. The realm needs a king who can fight. I'm not as young as I used to be, but I can still fight. Vather. Joffrey said with excitement, coming over to his father's side with a wide grin, a smiling Oris not far behind. I hits it exactly as you taught me. You did, Robert smiled, the king letting out a laugh as the young prince came to his side, the black-haired Baratheon placing a hand on his golden-haired son's shoulder. And there's a lesson for you, Joffrey, always aim for the joints if you can. It doesn't matter if you're fighting a man in plate or hunting in the woods. Whatever you are fighting can't do much harm if you stop it from moving any closer. Even with my crossbow. Your mother might have wanted you to be using that thing over a hammer and keeping out the melee, but there was never a king on the throne who fought in a battle outside of a siege with a bow, boy, Robert explained to his heir. Unless you're under siege, you should fight with either a sword or a hammer, and you'll want the latter. Because it's better at killing men in plate than a sword, since you only need one hit, the Crown Prince finished with pride. Exactly so. Robert laughed before lowering his voice. But don't tell your mother that. I'll make a soldier out of you yet, and it'll help if I don't have to hear her moaning about it. Joffrey laughed, and Robert mussed his hair. I'll have to find someone for you to squire for. What's about you, Lord Stark? Joffrey asked, curious and hopeful. You can't be his squire, Robert said. He's not a knight. Your father says it right, Eddard answered warmly. I could take you on, but I cannot knight you afterwards. Your uncle Stannis could, Robert considered. He'd make a good warrior out of you, and won't go softly because you're the prince. And that's bad, and you shouldn't want that. Unless I am of a King Targaryen. Robert roared with laughter, and even Eddard couldn't help himself, either. Now that's my boy. Gods. Robert, what have you been teaching him? I'll admit, I wasn't much of a father to him when he was younger, Robert said proudly, squeezing the prince for emphasis. I've been making up for lost time, Ned, and I've been teaching him everything I know. How to fight is one of them, how to judge people. And maybe a few curses his mother doesn't know about, the king said innocently. Cersei doesn't need to know about those, though. The Lord of Winterfell laughed to himself for a moment, smiling. Earlier, when he had been on his own and when he had been trying to charm Sansa, Eddard couldn't help but think that the Crown Prince seemed immensely certain of himself, arrogant, dangerously so even, but now, with his father alongside him, he was more his Rob than not. Younger and more excitable, yes, but an honest and kin and friendly young man all the same, one working to mimic his father's legendary charisma and ability to make friends, and the smile faded and left him with a question. Was the overconfidence just a veil he had worn to try and impress him and Sansa with his certainty in himself, the way most young men tried to impress women with their confidence, or was the reverse true, and that was the true Joffrey, with the smiling and eager boy he saw besides him now just a fake it he made for his father's sake? Or maybe both of them held a piece of the truth, and the Crown Prince could at times be both arrogant and proudful, only for him to love his father so much so that it brought the good out in him. Mayhaps. But Robert would surely have mentioned it, and either way, it would be difficult for even Eddard's own father to be able to know whether the boy was true or false when his words were so ruined by Domeric's strike. I won't say a word, Eddard said after a brief silence to think. Ned and I have to speak about lordly matters, Robert said to the prince, tapping him on the back. Go to Oris. There was no hesitation from the prince, not even a moment of asking a question to know why they were being sent away like Robb might do to him, only a smile and a nod before the Crown Prince walked towards the White Cloak at the head of the group, telling him that his father had sent him to the night and little more than that. Gods, to think that boy was a right cunt a few years ago, Robert laughed to himself. That mother of his never wanted me around, but look. Just a few talks every now and then and he comes out good. Then, almost abruptly, Robert looked to Theon. So how's the squid been, Ned? He hasn't been much trouble. He's quiet, Eddard Stark said. I had hoped for a time that he and Robb would grow close like brothers, give a chance to mend the bad blood between the North and the Isles, but Theon didn't know how things are done in the North and taunted Jon. Your bastard? Robert asked, seeing the reaction on Eddard's face before shrugging. It's not like I don't have a couple myself, Ned. Go on. It poisoned things between them, Eddard explained. The others haven't been willing to forget it, either. He's an outsider here, and Northmen have little love for. So he's a squid out of water, eh? Robert asked, Eddard only able to smile at the pun. So long as he isn't any trouble, then that's good enough. Friend or no, if Balon rebels again, you know what you will have to do. I know, Eddard said grimly. But Theon is no threat to Winterfell or any of its people, and with his heir within its walls Balon won't dare to rebel, not when he knows what will become of Theon for it. Has he been learning much? Robert asked before adding. The Iron Islanders won't have him if he doesn't know how to swing an axe or sail a ship. Roderick tells me he fights well, armed or unarmed, Eddard started. He's used to having to stand on his own, without allies, and it shows when he trains. He likes to fight more than one at a time. Like that uncle of his, then? Robert asked, eyeing the Greyjoy as they walked through the woods. Victorian, the Lord of Winterfell asked. Aye. A dangerous man, Robert said quietly and with an edge of true warrior's respect. He was one of the few who might have been able to take me in my prime. He has a warrior's cunning, that one. He does, and his nephew seems to share it, Eddard continued. But he's best of all with a bow, you saw that for yourself just. He shot that bear through both balls with one arrow, didn't he? Robert laughed. Remind me not to go near that ward of yours whenever he has a bow. Has he tried going to a tourney? Not yet, but he would win if he did, Eddard reasoned. He's better with a bow than I am. That's not much of a boast, Ned, Robert japed. And he's better than you, Robert. Robert laughed then, and the Lord of Winterfell laughed with him. It looks like you've made a fighter out of him, Ned, Robert smiled. But he has 2 ships as well, and Winterfell is in the middle of the north. A squid who can't swim is a dead squid. They'll never have him if he can't sail. Eddard agreed. I've been thinking of sending him to White Harbor, let the Mandaelis teach him about ships, or the Seastooks, mayhaps. Not the Darkstarks, though. They're too close to the Isles, close enough he could break out. Might be best to have him boating on a lake, Robert suggested with a shrug. No way he can escape that way. I thought about that as well for a time, Eddard nodded with understanding. But the waters are too calm on a lake for it to be the same. He has to sail on the seas if he's going to learn how to sail. Might be I could have him sent to Stannis, Robert suggested. He can sail, and he's got that smuggler of his to teach him if he can't, and he won't escape from Dragonstone, I'll tell you that. Is Stannis not at King's Landing anymore? Eddard asked, confused. I thought he was master of ships. He fled back to Dragonstone not long before Jon Arryn died, the king said with a sigh. I haven't a clue what he's doing now. Then he smiled slyly. Varys says he's in touch with some Issozi wench, though. Might be that brother of mine found himself a mistress and doesn't want the court to know about it. I have only met your brother a few times, Eddard spoke as he thought of Robert's brother as he had been at Harrenhal for the tourney and again for the Greyjoy rebellion. He doesn't seem the sort of man to keep a mistress. Nor does Renly seem the sort of man to bed a woman before marriage, Robert said with a small smile. He's a little too fond of Sir Loras Tyrell and his sister, and Varys tells me he pays more than a few visits to the Tyrell tents when she's there for her brother in the tourneys. Does anyone else know that you know? Not that I know, Robert said. But he'll probably marry her soon enough as well, and about time, too. That brother of mine needs some sons of his own if he's going to keep the Stormlands safe, and the Tyrell girl is fine enough for it. I would have thought about seeing if I could get her for Joff if it wasn't for Renly. It might be best for you to encourage him, then Eddard suggested. Before anyone else learns that he's taken her maidenhood. Something to mention when I go south again, as if I didn't have enough already, Robert laughed. Still, I wouldn't mind seeing if I couldn't find a bride for Joffrey whilst I'm up here. You saw the duel, Robert, Eddard said softly. Domeric defeated the prince fairly, and I won't force one of my daughters to marry someone that they do not wish to. But you've got 2 daughters, Ned, Robert smiled. Might be your Arya will take a liking to him, and if what Sansa says is true, being queen would suit her well enough. Eddard narrowed his eyes. Did she truly tell you such things? He asked. She did, Robert said more carefully, aware of the Stark's change in mood. It was simple talk, Ned. Was she not meant to? I would hope my daughters don't try to find husbands for one another, no, Eddard said more firmly before softening. As for Arya, the choice would be hers to make. I will not make it for her. I am not asking for a betrothal, Ned, the king soothed. Only a chance for the 2 to get to know one another better, so they might know if they want to be betrothed. Nothing more. Joffrey is free to talk to her whenever she wants, Eddard said, leaving no room for discussion of the matter. If I hear from her that she wants him to leave her alone, though, I would ask you to make sure he does. Fair enough, Ned. Robert smiled, the sight calming Eddard again. That's enough for me, and him, too. I'll make sure he knows not to push her or anything of the sort, but from what I hear of her, we'll get along well. You truly think so? Eddard asked, intrigued. If Arya did like Joffrey, then his lady wife would certainly be happy, to say the least, and so would he. I do, he answered with a nod. My Joffrey likes to hunt, and from what I hear so does your Arya. He would probably take her hunting with him. Truly? Eddard asked with amazement. Arya was always going to have trouble finding a husband that might tolerate her adventures around the castle, but to have the prince himself do so, the thought was tempting. It might very well be the best match she could possibly ask for. Truly, Robert answered with nothing but absolute certainty. I raised my son well, Ned. He'll treat his lady with the respect she deserves and nothing less, I swear it to you, Ned. You know I don't lie. I know you're terrible at it, Eddard smiled. I'll tell her what I think of the offer, but the choice will be hers to make and no one else's still. Good enough to be sure, Robert said with an understanding nod. And that's enough about such matters for a day. Gods, I missed talking with you, Ned. I should have came here years ago, when John was still here. He'd have loved a chance to see your sons. He would have, Eddard agreed with a somber silence between the two for a moment. He wouldn't want us to dwell on him, Robert. He hated mourning. He hated having nothing to do, Robert said with a sigh. Always was like him to never take a break. It was the stillbirths and miscarriages that caused it, we both know it, he never wanted to dwell on the thoughts of it all. So it was. Eddard nodded. He deserved better. He did. Robert sighed. We'll make her pay, Ned, I swear it, even if I have to lead the men up the lance and throw her out the moon door myself. Gods only know what she's doing at the Eyrie now, but she won't be doing it for long, I tell you that. And then we can deal with the Targaryens, once and for all, Robert said firmly. They're no danger to us, Robert, Eddard reasoned. They have no lands or coin to back them. They said the same thing about the Black Fires, but that didn't stop them from coming back with an army half a dozen times, Robert countered. The Iron Throne won't be safe till they're gone, Ned. And you are wrong about them not having any coin. Have they made an alliance with someone? Varys brings me news from across the narrow sea. He has a spy over there with them. A sellsword, the king explained. The beggar prince wed his sister in the manse of a Pentoshi magister and got more gifts than I got at my wedding to Cersei, not to mention knights. Men have came to his side. Eddard asked, astonished. I thought Jon soothed over the loyalist houses. So did I, but it seems not all of them were reasonable enough to listen, Robert said. It only takes one spark to light up a fire. If 2 knights come to his side, then there might be 2,000 more waiting for the banners to rise before declaring their loyalty to him, and who knows how many more might join them for the plunder or because they think the wrong side won the rebellion. But if he married his sister, then he has hurt his cause, Eddard explained to his king. She would have been his best chance to make an alliance, and for himself, too. He could have had the Martell heiress as his bride. That was an error for the sister fucker, Robert said. Years of inbreeding to keep the blood pure seems to have addled his wits, but even an inbred fool can be dangerous with a wise man behind him. Whoever paid for his wedding is the one we should be looking for, and I'll have Varys look into it when I return to King's Landing. And that's why I need you at King's Landing, Ned, the king sighed as they emerged into the clearing where their horses were kept. The master of horses' son, Harwin, stood tending to the steeds just as he was guarding them with half a dozen others. There's a war coming. I don't know where and I don't know when, but it is coming. And when it does, I'll need a strong and honest man at my side, Robert said, climbing atop his steed as his squire, Lancel, brought it forth. King's Landing doesn't have many of them these days. I will do what I can, Robert Eddard said truthfully and with an understanding. But I can't promise you anything. The North needs nearly as much management as the rest of the realms. Taxes, trade, disputes, it all comes to Winterfell, and that is something Robb isn't ready for. Not unless I know for certain that Catelyn and the others will be there at his side to guide him till he can stand on his own. Then let's hope for the sake of our sons, yours and mine, that she agrees, Robert said at last with a knowing nod towards Eddard. If a war comes, it'll be them who are marching on the front. May that day never come, Eddard said grimly before urging his horse onwards. And with that, they started back towards Winterfell, and but for a few words where Robert and he discussed the words they would need to place in the letter to ensure that the Lords of the Vale knew their orders came from their king and knew what needed to be done, nothing more was said, for all Eddard could think about was the bloody battles of the rebellion come again, of the agonized cries of dying horses and the sobs and shouts and screams of dying men, of strong and brave denizerins. Tears streaming down his cheeks as he begged Eddard not to let him die at Stony September. He could remember it all. How he had tried to staunch the open artery with his cloak, tying it tight and shut only to look up and see his eyes frozen still, the light and life already gone by the time he was done, of how little he weighed when Eddard pulled him from the water where John Connington had left him to die. But more than anything else he could remember the face he had learned to recognize at the Eyrie, the young Denise raised at his side. He had been young. He had a wife who wrote to him often to tell him about their newborn son. But when he closed his eyes, for even a moment, he saw Rob in his place, his red hair soaked with sweat and water and his cheeks shining with dying tears. For the sake of his family he would do anything to stop that from ever happening, anything, all to stop a repeat of the slaughter. And as the gates of Winterfell loomed above to welcome their lord home, he turned to the friend who had found him with Denise's broken body in his arms. "My mind is made up, Robert. Is it? I will be your hand. For their sake. ********. End of part 23. Notes. Phew. Laughing smiley. I'd like to be able to write a summary for this one, but it's a bit late in the day for me to do it, so I'll just end this here and say that the next POV will be an Arya one, with a bit of a time skip covering the rest of Robert's stay at Winterfell since the show must go on, and then we'll have a Viserys POV. Also, a brief correction thanks to a reader, but Arya is actually 9, not 8. Whoops. Tongue poking smiley. Chapter 24, Part 24, Viserys 3. Chapter text. *********. Within the black walls of Volantis. The manses within the fortified breast of the black walls of Volantis were large and sprawling places, lavishly decorated and lavishly built and lavishly furnished in equal measure, yet even they were not as large as the one that Illyrio had called his own. Such palaces were exactly that, palaces, as much a statement and display of wealth and power as they were a place to live, tens to hundreds of bedchambers that stayed empty at all times of year, yet kept clean and tidy for guests that would never come, maintained solely as an instrument of boasting. Viserys Targaryen could never feel comfortable in such a place, so soulless and empty, but this man's felt different, comfortable, homely, for although the dining room he sat within now was not nearly as large as the one that had been the host to his and his sister's wedding but a moon or before, it reminded him of something far more special. It reminded him of the Red Keep. It reminded him of that small room from the Targaryen's youth where he might eat with his mother and his father and his brother and all the others, a room fit to sit no more than 10, a place for them on those days that the Red Keep wasn't home to a feast. It had been a small chamber, less regal than the Great Hall, less grand, a place where they might drop the facades of royalty for a time and be themselves. His father's japes and stories of the War of the Ninepenny Kings, where he managed to find and kill a Black Fir standard bearer and tried to bring the banner back to camp as a trophy, only to be nearly shot off his horse by a Martell who thought him to be a Black Fir himself. His good sister's weary sighs as Roriger came to the table with a book in his hand and placed it beside his plate, absent-mindedly picking at the plate as he focused on his reading, sometimes even stabbing at thin air with his knife before realizing there was nothing there. He remembered all of that, even though it was before his sister-wife was born. He remembered it even though his father had been dead for 14 years, round through the back by the Lannister who was sworn to keep him safe. He remembered it even though his brother had been dead for 14 years, his head crushed by Robert Baratheon's warhammer, despite how the two had met at Harrenhal the year before and laughed and japed and met one another as cousins might do. That was why it felt so comfortable here. It reminded him of home. Home. His real home. Not the place in Braavos where the good Sir Willem d'Arry had helped to keep him safe, nor any of the manses they had visited only to be turned out into the streets at night's end, nor even the Pentosh's manse where he had been wed and mayhaps fathered a child with his sister-wife. His real home. Westeros. His sister had never seen it and knew it only from the tales that he had told her of it, endless fields of green, towering castles that were as beautiful as they were strong, a safe land where one needn't fear being slaughtered by Dothraki or captured by Magisters or countless other fates that might have befallen them in their exile, but one day soon, he would make sure that she had the chance to see it for herself and know that she was home. To know that the child she may very well be carrying even now would not need to grow up in a world filled with fear and fright, but safe within the walls of the Red Keep and surrounded by dragon banners that soared in the winds with pride again. He would make sure it happened. He had to. Who else could bring a family that had existed for millennia back from the brink in its darkest hour than he, the last son of the last family of dragon lords left in the world, a family that had outlasted the Giscari Empire, the Rhoynish city-states and the dragons themselves? Who else could take on the work of restoring the Targaryens to their rightful place atop of Westeros, and bring the dragon soaring back to prominence? His sister. She was too gentle-hearted, too full of love for all the people of the world, the very trait that would make her a magnificent queen, making her unable to do what must be done to see them return to Westeros, not in chains, but with an army. Those were the thoughts that filled Viserys' mind as plates came and went before him, covered in dishes that he had never encountered before, not in Pentos at the table of the portly Illyrio Patis, not in Braavos where peoples beyond counting had melted together into one, not even in Westeros or at Dragonstone where the echo of the freehold still resounded across the walls, a faint reminder of the glory that had been. They were plates of Volanten food. They were plates of Valyrian food, the fare of Triax